However, Zhongfeng's entire body seemed to be made of metal, and was impervious to blades and swords. On the other hand, Zhu Lang's entire body seemed to be made of cotton that could deflect attacks. When the Empress and Zhongfeng's fists collided, a shockwave erupted from the point of contact. Zhongfeng retreated 5 to 6 steps while the Empress retreated 7 to 8 steps. This made everyone even more certain that the Empress was in a bad situation. One had to know that if the Empress was at her peak, even if Zhongfeng condensed the power of his divine martial and doubled it, it would still be difficult for him to withstand a punch from Qi Zixiao. But now he had the upper hand. From this, it could be seen that the Empress was in a bad situation. At the same time, Shi Qingjiao appeared behind the Empress like a ghost and stabbed her waist with a pair of daggers. The Empress punched the edge of the daggers with both of her fists, producing a metallic clashing sound. 2 more bloodstains appeared on the Empress's fists. A long rod struck out from the Empress's left side, aiming at all the vital parts of the Empress's body. At the same time, a mass of sword shadows shrouded the Empress from top to bottom. The Empress had no choice but to retreat. At this point in time, she was being attacked from all directions. If she was at her peak, she wouldn't care about these people. But now that her strength had dropped to 30%, her speed had decreased significantly. The 8 pavilion masters had condensed their heaven-grade weapons, and their strength had increased tremendously. For a moment, the Empress was at a disadvantage. After receiving a rod strike, the sword shadows that filled the sky caused a few bloody lines to appear on her body. She seized an opportunity to rush out of the encirclement and leap toward the archway. The Empress raised her eyebrows and her heart was filled with murderous intent. If she wasn't willing to use this poison before, she would really be left here if she didn't use it now. Furthermore, she hadn't gotten the antidote yet. She couldn't leave, let alone escape. Qi Zixiao can't hold on any longer and wants to escape? Stop her. Seeing this situation, Jiang Hailu calmed down and a glint of excitement flashed in his eyes. In front of the Empress was a swarm of disciples from the 9 pavilions. She leaped up and wanted to leap over the heads of the crowd. 20 to 30 figures leaped up at the same time, brandishing all kinds of weapons in their hands. In the next moment, those 20 to 30 figures fell like dumplings in a pot. The Empress was also blocked by this and paused for a moment. Once again, Shi Qingjiao appeared behind the Empress like a ghost and slashed 27 times consecutively, transforming into a round of sword light. Get lost. The Empress's face was as cold as snow. She turned around and smashed her fist back. Both sides separated upon contact. Shi Qingjiao let out a muffled groan as she was sent flying. The Empress's hand was bleeding. Using this punch, the Empress flew a few meters away again. More than 10 figures leaped up to intercept her. Get lost. After knocking everyone down, she stepped on someone's body and headed straight for the archway. Her target was the bag hanging on the archway. Jiang Hailu, who was chasing after her, understood that there was definitely something strange about the bag. Otherwise, why would she do such a thing? However, it was too late for him to say anything. The Empress flipped over the archway, and that black bag was already in her hand. At the same time, a meatball smashed down like a meteorite. The Empress turned around in midair and kicked the ball. Even though she repelled Zhu Lang, she was smashed back to the ground and was immediately surrounded by many disciples from the 9 pavilions. The Empress took out 2 small bottles from the bag with one hand, crushed them, and poured them into her mouth. Not good. Stop her. Upon seeing this, Jiang Hailu immediately thought that the Empress was taking some medicine to restore her body's condition. He hurriedly shouted, but it was too late. He could only look on helplessly as the Empress took the medicine. It will take time for the medicine to take effect. Surround and kill her. Jiang Hailu shouted, and immediately pounced over. It wasn't only him who thought so. Everyone else thought so too. No one thought that the Empress would actually take the antidote to the poisonous gas. The Empress threw the bag on the ground and stepped on it. Immediately, all the bottles in the bag were smashed. The Empress kicked the bag with the tip of her foot. The bag was torn into pieces and flew toward the crowd. More than 10 people were injured by the broken glass. The bag of sarin gas was scattered in all directions and began to volatilize in the air. Only 0. 5 milligrams of sarin gas was enough to kill an ordinary adult. It was colorless, odorless, and extremely volatile. The bag that the Empress was carrying was at least 10 kilograms. Scattered in this area, one could imagine the concentration of sarin gas. Chapter 200. The Empress was surrounded by 8 people. No matter who made a move, she would return it with a punch. She didn't use any fancy moves and relied entirely on brute force to defeat them. This had always been her style. No matter who her opponent was, she would kill them with a single punch. If she was at her peak, she wouldn't be afraid of these people. However, after defeating Hua Sanlu, she was at a complete disadvantage. Wounds were added to her body from time to time, and her red dress was already covered in blood. Not only was the blood flowing from her hands, but there was also a half-inch deep wound on her waist. This was left by Shi Qingjiao. She always looked for the most opportune moment to deal a fatal blow after the others attacked. If it was someone else, she would have already cut open their waist. On her shoulder, there was a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. This was left by Jiang Hailu. The Empress's face turned colder and paler. Her red lips were even more eye-catching, like blood and fire. Her gaze was still as cold as ever. Everyone admired Qi Zixiao's toughness. From the beginning to the end, there was no change in her gaze. Whether it was before or now, there was no sign of retreat or weakness. From the beginning to the end, she never flinched. However, although everyone admired her, it was more important to keep her here. Even if Hua Sanlu was dead, no one dared to underestimate the 9 pavilions. Not to mention the benefits from the great Xia imperial family. Qi Zixiao's head wasn't just priceless. She can't hold on any longer. Everyone understood that Qi Zixiao had a huge fight with Hua Sanlu. Even though it wasn't a long time, she had consumed a lot of energy. Now that she had lost so much blood, she wouldn't be able to hold on for long. At the thought of this, everyone moved faster and more ruthlessly. They even exchanged injuries for injuries and took advantage of this time to keep Qi Zixiao here. At this moment, some of the surrounding disciples of the 9 pavilions started to feel nauseous. Then they fell to the ground. It wasn't just a few people, but more than 100 people fell to the ground. Such a commotion shocked everyone. Many people shouted their names and rushed to check, only to see their bodies twitching and foaming at the mouth. Poison. Everyone's expression changed drastically. Where did the poison come from? Qi Zixiao? Or was it someone else? But other than Qi Zixiao, who else could it be? Before everyone could figure out what exactly happened, the people around them also fell to the ground. Everyone dispersed. Although they did not know how Qi Zixiao poisoned them, they still subconsciously distanced themselves from each other. However, it was already too late. Batches of people began to fall as soon as they started moving. What would be the concentration of 10 kilograms of sarin gas after it was released? 1 kilogram of sarin gas could kill millions of people. 10 kilograms was enough to turn an area into a dead zone. Not to mention in such a small area. Ordinary people would definitely die within 2 minutes if they were exposed. From the time the Empress kicked the sarin gas until now, a total of 7 minutes had passed. Excluding the time for the sarin gas to evaporate, she had been exposed to a high concentration of sarin gas for 5 minutes. The disciples of the 9 pavilions were much stronger than ordinary people. It took them 5 minutes to die, but because of this, everyone had inhaled a large amount of sarin gas. It was too late for them to escape. One by one, the disciples of the 9 pavilions ran out with terrified expressions on their faces. However, they didn't run far before they fell to the ground with their bodies twitching. The expressions of the 8 great pavilion masters changed drastically. No matter what, they had never thought that Qi Zixiao would actually poison them. Furthermore, they had no idea how she did it. Qi Zixiao, did you take the antidote just now? Jiang Hailu suddenly recalled the scene just now and immediately understood. What Qi Zixiao took just now wasn't some medicine to restore her body's condition, but an antidote. At this moment, everyone stopped and subconsciously looked at the black backpack that she had kicked into pieces. At this moment, it had turned into countless fragments that were scattered on the ground. Just now, Qi Zixiao took 2 small bottles from that backpack and drank them. Where would she find the antidote now? I have said before, all of you are courting death. The Empress looked at everyone coldly. Her breathing was somewhat rapid, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was extremely difficult for her to persevere for the past 7 minutes. Take out the antidote, Jiang Hailu shouted sternly with a glimmer of hope, even though he knew that it was very unlikely. At this moment, it was as if he had been doused with ice water, and his whole body was trembling. The faces of the others were deathly pale. Although they were still fine, it was only because they were stronger than ordinary disciples that they could persevere for a little longer. Antidote. I drank it, the Empress said faintly. This simple sentence made them tremble all over. The antidote you want is with me, and I will destroy it before I die. Zhu Lang's face turned ashen. It doesn't matter, I can go in and look for it. There must be more, the Empress said. There shouldn't be many antidotes that need to be stored in such a box. That's right, that antidote was previously stored in a very exquisite box. Presumably, it wasn't specially found by Zhu Lang. There was one more sentence that she didn't say for fear of reminding everyone. Even if the antidote was destroyed, as long as there was a little bit of residue left, it would be enough to compare the smell. Presumably, different antidotes had different ingredients and smells. I will kill you to accompany me in death. Third Pavilion Master Zhong Feng roared and rushed toward the Empress, but she dodged to the side. At this moment, she didn't need to persevere anymore. Except for a few ordinary disciples who were far away, all of them were lying on the ground. Although some of them were still twitching, they probably wouldn't be able to live much longer. These few people wouldn't be able to persevere for much longer. Even though they were at the spirit will level, they were only slightly stronger than the others. Furthermore, they had condensed their spirit martial arts and could persevere for a while longer. However, this didn't mean that they were immune to poison. Thousands of people were lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. It was a ghastly sight. The few disciples who had escaped didn't dare to stay and ran far away. No one knew how wide the range of this poison was. Zhu Lang looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. He crushed the wooden box in his hand, turned around and fled outside. He had a glimmer of hope in his heart that there might be a chance of survival if he left here. Seeing his actions, the others also started to move. 5 of them ran toward the periphery, while the other 4 felt that they couldn't escape death and rushed toward Qi Zixiao. Even if they were to die, they wanted to add 2 more scars to her body. However, Zhu Lang didn't even run 5 meters before he felt that it was getting harder and harder to control his body. Then he fell to the ground. He was the weakest among them and was the first to fall. The sound of Zhu Lang falling to the ground was like a heavy hammer hitting everyone's body. Everyone had a miserable look on their faces. Behind him was Zhang Zijiang, who was about to jump over the roof, but he fell head first. The Empress calmly dodged the attacks of the last 4 people and watched as they fell one by one. You can't leave Great Xia. Jiang Helia's eyes were filled with viciousness. After he finished speaking, he fell a few steps away from the Empress. The Empress stood there indifferently. Other than 3 to 5 people who had escaped, the rest of the people in the 9 pavilions had fallen in this kernel. She knew that she had to hurry. She understood a little about the sarin gas from the other world. With such a high concentration, it would be very dangerous even if she took the antidote. It was just that the physical condition of the aboriginals was much better than that of the spirit will experts in Great Xia. In terms of physical strength, even 5 Hua Sanlias couldn't compare to her. Coupled with the antidote, it didn't have much of an effect on her. However, if she continued to stay here, it would be hard to say. In a flash, she came to Zhu Lang's side. He was holding some of the remaining dregs in his hands. After collecting them, the Empress plunged into those few pagodas to search. After a while, she left with a few boxes. As for the legacy of the 9 pavilions, it was indeed the top legacy of Great Xia. However, she wasn't interested in it and couldn't be bothered to plunder it. Behind her, only the ghost-like 9 pavilions and countless corpses were left on the ground. Other than a few ordinary disciples who had escaped, the rest of the 9 pavilions were all dead. Chapter 201. Ren Baqian was very anxious on the mountain. It was impossible to say that he wasn't worried. But other than moving his fingers, What else could he do? After waiting for at least 8 to 10 hours, Renbaqian finally saw a red figure appear in front of him. At this moment, the Empress was in a sorry state. Her white inner shirt and red chiffon skirt were torn and stained with blood. Her waist and shoulders were dripping with blood. Her face was pale, and there was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Zixiao. Renbaqian's heart tightened. Seeing the Empress in this state, it was as if his heart was stabbed. In his eyes, the Empress had always been awe-inspiring. When had she ever looked like this? When had she ever been in such a sorry state? But who was she doing this for? With such thoughts in his mind, he couldn't speak for a moment. At this moment, he threw the matter of the antidote to the back of his mind. Open your mouth. The Empress stood in front of him and said. A longan-sized pill appeared in her hand, and a few boxes were thrown on the ground. Seeing that Renbaqian was still in a daze, the Empress pinched open his mouth and popped the pill in. It almost got stuck in his throat and choked him to death. Seeing that he couldn't even breathe, she quickly slapped his back to get the pill out and stuffed it into his mouth. Renbaqian chewed the pill with great difficulty and swallowed it. Then the Empress stuffed a water bag into his mouth and drank a mouthful of water. Renbaqian didn't have any complaints about almost choking to death. The Empress had always been like this. This small matter couldn't be compared to what she had done in the past. Are your injuries serious? Renbaqian finally asked this question. I can only use 30% of my strength for 1 month. But even with 30% of my strength, no one can stop me. The Empress was always full of confidence. But I'm hungry. The Empress's tone changed. The battle just now caused a lot of damage to her body. At the same time, she felt a strong sense of hunger. The Aboriginals needed to rely on large amounts of food or medicinal herbs to replenish their qi and blood. Renbaqian moved his fingers but still couldn't move. The Empress looked at him and said, It will take a while for the antidote to take effect. I will go and find some food. Renbaqian nodded. The antidote wasn't an elixir and naturally wouldn't take effect immediately. He watched as the Empress left again. After the Empress left, Renbaqian tried to move his body every once in a while. However, he couldn't move at all. Just when he was doubting whether the medicine that the Empress brought back with her injuries was effective, he felt his shoulder twisting a little. Renbaqian's face immediately revealed an ecstatic expression. Although it was just a slight movement of his shoulder, he had not been able to move at all for the past 10 days. At this time, even the slightest change made him extremely sensitive and excited. This meant that the antidote was real. Following the movement of the shoulders, the forearms began to move as well, followed by the arms and the legs. When he could move his waist, he felt like he had come back to life. Renbaqian supported Qi Shui, who was beside him, and tried to stand up. Not being able to move for more than 10 days made his body feel rusty. His joints kept creaking and his legs felt weak. He felt like he was experiencing the effects of aging in advance. If he wanted to recover, he would probably have to move a lot more. While Renbaqian was moving his body, the Empress came back with a lot of meat wrapped in oiled paper. It was emitting a fragrant aroma. Seeing that Renbaqian was moving carefully, the Empress revealed a look of joy in her eyes. She had finally saved him. This was the greatest joy in her heart at this moment. Zixiao. Renbaqian looked at her with a face full of joy. The Empress suppressed the joy in her heart, carried the meat wrapped in oiled paper and asked, Do you want to eat? Her voice was clear and less cold. Okay. Renbaqian nodded happily. As for the origin of the meat, he didn't care at all. In any case, the Empress definitely didn't have any money on her. Indeed, the Empress brought back a lot of meat and wine. Renbaqian only ate a little, and quietly watched the Empress eat. It was as if he could never get enough of her. You have worked hard, Renbaqian said sincerely. He didn't say thank you. At this moment, it was already meaningless to say thank you. The Empress raised her head and drank a mouthful of wine. She simply said, If you lie to me in the future, I will kill you. Upon hearing this, Renbaqian couldn't stop laughing. This made the Empress a little sullen. This guy was getting more and more impudent. After a long while, Renbaqian finally stopped laughing. He looked at the Empress with a sincere face and said, When the time comes, you won't have to do anything. The Empress remained silent and ignored him. After a while, the Empress finished eating the wine and meat. Feeling less hungry, she then said, "Let's go. Just now, 2 people ran away. We can't hide the news for long. We have to leave Great Xia before they react." Previously, 5 people ran away. The Empress caught up with 3 of them and killed them. She didn't know where the other 2 were hiding, but she couldn't be bothered to look for them. A day after the 2 of them left, a group of people arrived at the call of the 9 pavilions. Among them, the leader was a man in his 30s who was dressed in an embroidered robe. Even though the 9 pavilions was feared by many, they still had some dealings with the outside world. Otherwise, how could the Lien family be in such a desperate situation? This group of people came to the 9 pavilions for some business. However, when they walked to the mountain pass, everyone's facial expression immediately changed. From here, they could see countless corpses lying on the ground. Almost all the buildings near the gate of the 9 pavilions had collapsed. What happened here? Everyone was shocked. Someone launched a large-scale attack on the 9 pavilions? How was this possible? Who was so daring? More importantly, the 9 pavilions was like a ghost town at this moment. There wasn't the slightest movement inside. The last time they came here, there were many disciples and livestock. But now there wasn't even a bug in sight. Everyone stood at the mountain pass and didn't know whether to advance or retreat. They wanted to go forward and check, but they were afraid that there were enemies inside. After waiting for more than an hour, there was still no sound inside. At this time, everyone mustered up their courage and went down. The more the leader in the embroidered robe walked in, the more shocked he was because the corpses lying on the ground were all disciples of the 9 pavilions. Very quickly, everyone realized that these people were all poisoned to death. The 9 pavilions were famous for their use of poison. How could there be a poison expert in this world who could actually poison the people of the 9 pavilions to death? What about Hua Sanlu? What about the other 8 pavilion masters? Even if ordinary disciples were poisoned to death, these few people couldn't possibly be poisoned to death, right? When he saw half a corpse, his whole body instantly froze. This corpse only had a head above the chest. He had seen this face before. It was Hua Sanlu, the 5th most powerful expert in the world. Hua Sanlu. Previously, he had only seen him twice from afar. At that time, he was so powerful. Now he actually died here? Since Hua Sanlu died here, could it be that the other pavilion masters were also dead? Otherwise, why wasn't there anyone cleaning up here? Suddenly, a thought emerged in his mind. This thought terrified him. If this news were to spread, the whole world would probably be shaken. The 9 pavilions had actually been destroyed. Soon after, another thought emerged in his mind. Since the 9 pavilions had been destroyed, were the resources and secret manuals that the 9 pavilions had accumulated over the past few hundred years still around? When he thought of this, he suddenly felt a burning passion in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the 9 pavilions with a burning gaze. However, when he walked to the entrance of the village, a person beside him suddenly fell to the ground, followed by a second and a third person. This made him suddenly think of something. Was there still poison here? When he hurriedly tried to leave, he didn't run far before he fell to the ground. Yes, even though a day had passed, the sarin gas still lingered in the air here. Furthermore, it was attached to those corpses. When they checked and flipped over the corpses just now, they naturally came into contact with some. Only a few people who were guarding the mountain pass were spared. A few of them rushed in and carried the man away, but he was already foaming at the mouth and dead. When the rest of the people saw this, they hurriedly ran out of the mountain. As they left, the news of the 9 pavilions being destroyed spread. In just 2 days, countless people gathered outside the mountain. The 2 disciples who originally ran away wanted to come back in 2 days to take a look and bring away those ancient manuals. Therefore, they hesitated and did not spread the news of Qi Zixiao's arrival in Great Xia. It was just that they did not dare to go near for a while, and were discovered by these people. It was only now that the others learned from the 2 disciples that Dayo's Empress, Qi Zixiao, personally came to the 9 pavilions, beat up Hua Sanlu, and used an unknown poison to kill the 8 pavilion masters and all the disciples of the 9 pavilions. Everyone was shocked. Subsequently, the whole world was shocked. Countless pigeons spread this news throughout the entire Great Xia in just 2 days, and then to the rest of the world. Countless people spread this news by word of mouth. Countless people were shocked by the fact that the 9 pavilions had been destroyed, and even more people guessed Qi Zixiao's strength. After all, she could beat up Hua Sanlu, which meant that she was ranked 5th in the world now. There were even more people guessing what poison Qi Zixiao used to kill thousands of people in the 9 pavilions, including the 8 pavilion masters, in such a short period of time. No one knew that the Empress of Deyo, Qi Zixiao, who was originally ranked 7th in the world, was actually an expert in using poison. Her identity, the strength that she had displayed, and the methods that she had displayed, all of them had shocked the world. At the same time, the troops at the border were getting ready, and countless experts were dispatched. No matter what, they had to make Qi Zixiao stay, and not let her return to Deyo. Chapter 202. When the news of the destruction of the 9 pavilions spread, countless people in Great Xia were shocked. On Earth, in Istanbul, a man and a woman were shuttling through the streets and alleys of this famous tourist city, like an ordinary couple. Every day, there were countless such couples coming to this city from all over the world. As a result, it was hard to attract attention. If there was anything that caught people's attention, it would be the combination of that woman's exquisite and heroic face, as well as her ice-cold aura that kept strangers away. However, that feeling was completely gone at this moment. All her attention was on the Turkish barbecue meat in her hands, and she only occasionally glanced at the beautiful scenery around her. Renbachian was also carrying a bag with all kinds of famous local snacks in it. The two of them bought and ate along the way. Renbachian carried the bag along the way, and the Empress ate along the way. Every time Renbachian saw a snack, he would run over and buy it. He would try a little bit of it himself, and the rest would go into the Empress's mouth. Ever since the battle that day, the Empress's appetite had increased tremendously. She could get about 40 kilograms of meat from a 50 kilograms sheep, which was enough for a strong man to eat. The Empress could eat 2 of them leisurely, which was equivalent to her weight. No matter what food entered her stomach, it would be immediately digested and turned into essence energy, replenishing every cell in her body. During the 2 days of travel, the 2 of them would stop occasionally. The Empress would catch a few animals for Renbachian to roast. Then, she would sit on Qi Shui's back and eat them elegantly, but at an extremely fast speed. This slowed down their travel speed by quite a bit. After returning to Earth, the 2 of them took the opportunity to recuperate. Renbachian took good care of his body since he was still a little weak. On the other hand, the Empress was a man of few words and focused all her attention on eating. However, Renbachian didn't know that under the Empress's calm expression, her entire body was in pain. It was just that she was tough and endured everything without batting an eyelid. She would only speak when she was hungry. Looking at the Empress finishing a Turkish barbecue and vegetable pancake, Renbachian handed her the lion's milk, which was Turkish liquor, that he had just bought from a restaurant. This kind of anise liquor was generally around 70 degrees. After mixing it with water or ice, it would turn milky white before being drunk. The Empress raised her head and gulped down half a bottle of lion's milk that had been mixed with ice cubes. Her face was slightly red as she had already drunk 3 bottles of lion's milk along the way. Yes, she hadn't stopped eating since she arrived in the morning. The food that she ate while she was on the road in Great Xia wasn't enough for her. However, she was able to catch some animals from time to time for Renbachian to roast and eat since they were on the road. Now that she had returned to the safety of Earth, she could finally eat to her heart's content. Renbachian looked at the corner of the Empress's mouth and used his finger to rub it. The Empress paused for a moment, turned her head to look at him, lowered her head, and continued to look at the multi-layered pancake in her hand. Then she gently bit it. The 2 of them walked around for a long time, but they didn't feel much about the beautiful scenery and exotic flavors here. However, they had an intuitive understanding of the snacks here. In the afternoon, the 2 of them went to the beach in Istanbul, near the mouth of the Black Sea. There were many people on the beach, and hot beauties in bikinis could be seen everywhere. They had beach mats under their bodies and were lying there basking in the sun. The 2 of them stood near the beach. Renbachian's gaze roamed around the beach. All kinds of hot beauties in bikinis were a very common sight in this world, but it made the Empress raise her eyebrows. "Do they look good?" the Empress asked coldly. "No, they can't be compared to you. There's no comparison at all. You can see that my gaze isn't on them." Renbaqian turned his head to look at her, and shook his head. "Everything here, the sea, the beach, and the people here are just embellishments to serve as a foil to a person." At this moment, the Empress was a little tipsy. After drinking a few bottles of lion's milk, she became even more beautiful and moving. Renbaqian felt that she was like a flame, and he was the moth that couldn't help but throw himself into it. Well, in fact, he just liked to see the Empress frown, smile and frown. That kind of liveliness that was rarely seen in Dayo also made him want to tease her a little. However, he only gave it a little every time. He wasn't a bullfighter and didn't want to be on the edge of life and death. However, he didn't come here just to make the Empress angry. He really liked the sea. Perhaps this was some kind of desire in the heart of a person who grew up in the mainland. For example, "I have a house facing the sea where spring is warm and the flowers are blooming." This definitely wasn't something that people who lived by the coast could say. The sea was always the romance of the people in the mainland, especially when they were in pairs. In fact, people who lived by the coast didn't think so. This was because living by the sea was too humid, especially when it was a house with a sea view. After living for a long time, it was easy to get rheumatism and various kinds of cold diseases. The Empress was originally somewhat unhappy. After hearing what Renbaqian said, she didn't say much and continued to eat her snacks with a cold face. At this moment, she was holding a cheese roll in her hand. This kind of sweet food was also her favorite. Renbaqian smiled and said, "If you don't like it here, then go back." After spending half a day in the car, it was worth it to see the Empress's "I'm not happy" expression. Both of them returned to the city and stayed for a night. The next day, they took a flight to the imperial capital. After staying for a night, they chartered a car to return to Shurching early the next morning. Renbaqian threw his things on the floor and immediately collapsed on the sofa. Originally, his body hadn't recovered. Moreover, he was so tired from the long journey that he really felt that he didn't have any strength at all. In less than half an hour, the Empress looked at him with bright and piercing eyes and said, "I'm hungry." "Okay." Renbaqian leaned on the sofa and turned his head with a smile on his face. Such a simple request was something that he had to do even if he was tired. Both of them then drove out to have a meal, and went to the supermarket to buy a bunch of food. For the entire afternoon, they curled up on the sofa and ate all kinds of snacks, KFC family buckets, pizza, donkey barbecue, and all kinds of cooked food while watching a movie. Occasionally, Renbaqian would snatch a piece of food from the Empress's hands to eat. Every time, the Empress would look at him, but he still didn't get tired of it. Even though there was a pile of food on the table, he still felt that the thing in the Empress's hands was more tempting to him. At night, Renbaqian watched the Empress enter her room. Only then did he return upstairs in a cheerful mood to visualize the visualization of water. Previously, when he was poisoned, every time he visualized the visualization of water, the lake water would surge like raging waves, making it impossible for him to dive into it. It wasn't until these few days that he could move his body that he could gradually dive into the lake. The lake in the visualization of water was originally a part of his body. Every time he dived into the lake, his body would change little by little. To put it simply, his kidneys were of the water attribute. It was just that the time he spent cultivating was too short. Other than his strength increasing to about 160 kilograms under the effect of the drug, he didn't discover any other changes. The next morning, Renbaqian woke up and made breakfast for the Empress. Then he gave Chunqing a call to inform him that he was fine now. Upon hearing this news, Chunqing felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. These days he practically squatted in the laboratory, but unfortunately, the progress was very slow. Less than 10 minutes after Renbaqian called Chunqing, he received another call from Chunqing. When he picked up the call, he heard a woman's voice coming from the other end. "Lucky boy, where are you? Can you come to the laboratory for a while?" "Not interested." Renbaqian immediately knew that it was Su Shan's voice and immediately hung up the call. Since he was fine now, he had no interest in going to the laboratory. Less than 10 seconds later, the phone started to ring again. Renbachian immediately hung up the call. On the third time, Renbachian frowned and picked up the call. Boss, don't forget that you are our boss. Do you know what kind of impact the R worm will have on this world? As long as there is a way to control it, it can cure terminal illnesses like leukemia. The whole world will benefit from it, and you will also become a billionaire. Now that the progress of the experiment is very slow, please make a trip down to the laboratory. Su Shan was afraid that Renbachian would hang up the call again. Once the call was connected, a series of words burst out of her mouth. Money has no meaning to me anymore, Renbachian muttered softly. Money really had no meaning to him anymore. However, if it was as effective as what Su Shan said, it would be a pity to ignore it. The Empress seemed to have brought back a few more antidotes. And if he was able to develop a special drug to cure leukemia, not only would he gain money, he would also gain social status in this world. In the future, if he wanted to obtain certain things, the necessary social status and connections were indispensable. Currently, if he wanted to obtain any important things, such as a CNC machine tool or other high-tech products, he did not have any means to do so. Even if he wanted to sell gemstones, he had to go through Chengqing. If he were to enter the circle of the rich and powerful, as long as he occasionally befriended some people, it would be of great help to him in obtaining whatever he wanted. Chapter 203. In the afternoon, Renbachian and the Empress brought the antidote to the bottom of the building where the laboratory was located and gave Chengqing a call. Not long after, Su Shan and Sun Qing directly ran downstairs to pick him up. It seemed like they couldn't wait any longer. Upon seeing him, they immediately pulled him over and carefully examined him from top to bottom. That's enough from the both of you. Renbachian looked unhappy. The last time he was poisoned, the both of you checked for a long time but to no avail. Now you two are touching me from top to bottom like perverts. What do you two want? Which bastard touched my buttocks? F***ck, you almost touched my DD. Renbachian's face turned green. The two of them then pulled Renbachian with a surprised look. Lucky boy, how exactly did you do it? Let's go up and talk. Renbachian looked at the Empress's face, which had the word, "I'm not happy," written all over it. If this was in Dayo, she might have slapped these two to death. Simply put, she was protecting her food. Renbachian had already discovered this a long time ago. However, in this world, the Empress was already very restrained. They took the elevator up. Chengqing wasn't there, but Chengqing's father was already waiting upstairs. His gaze first fell on the Empress. These few years, he had seen all kinds of people and felt that he had some foresight. Even though this woman's appearance was stunning, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that when he saw her, he would naturally start to be cautious, afraid of offending her. Ordinary people might not feel this so obviously, but for a wily old fox like him who had seen all kinds of officials, he was especially sensitive. This woman was definitely the kind of person who held the power of life and death. However, his gaze only swept across the other party and returned to Renbachian. He really didn't dare to be rash, lest he offended her for unknown reasons. This kind of person should never be offended. It's good that you are fine. I heard from Chengqing a few days ago, and was still worried. Now that you are fine, everything is fine, Papa Chen said with a warm smile. Thank you, uncle. Both parties had always had a good relationship. Renbachian also had a very good impression of Papa Chen. Just like the matter of this laboratory, even though he saved Chengqing, if it was someone else, they wouldn't give him 60% of the shares just for a formula and a sample. It would already be considered pretty good if they could give him 40%. However, at that time, Papa Chen was just an ordinary person with a salary of a few thousand yuan. Since then, Renbachian felt that Papa Chen was someone he could work with. Therefore, he did not think too much about bringing the antidote this time. Otherwise, normal people wouldn't take out such a thing so easily. This was because the previous laboratory and agreement were only related to the black mud cream. However, he didn't care about these things. Things on this side of Earth seemed to have lost their appeal to him. Although he still didn't have money, status, or a young model, he no longer yearned for them. It was enough for him to have a certain status on Earth and obtain what he needed. This is it convenient for you to introduce us? Papachin chuckled. Although he could sense that this woman was not an ordinary person, there was no harm in getting intimate with her. Who knows, he might be able to get intimate with some big boss. For a businessman like him, this was a dream come true. This is... Rinpochian turned his head and looked at the Empress. She was also looking at him. My fiancé. Rinpochian looked at the Empress and said. The Empress's eyes flickered for a moment before she shifted her gaze elsewhere. Cough cough. Hearing this answer, Papachin almost choked to death. Very compatible. Papachin praised after coughing a few times. His tone was sincere. If an ordinary person heard this, they would probably think that he really thought so. Seeing that Rinpochian only said this sentence, Papachin didn't ask any further. In any case, he and Rinpochian were in the same boat now. Following which, Su Shan and Sun Qing performed a series of checkups on Rinpochian. To their surprise, he had really recovered. The worms in his body had completely disappeared. How did you do it? What did you eat? Both of them looked excited. Papachin was also moved. In fact, he knew about this matter. Sun Qing and Su Shan directly looked for him to request for more equipment and research on the worms. Furthermore, they described the prospects of the worms. Therefore, other than expressing his concern, he also came here for this reason. This is the antidote. Rinpochian took out a small antique box from the bag that he was carrying. Su Shan and Sun Qing's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Papachin's gaze was also fixed on that box. At the same time, he was calculating what he should pay to make the other party hand over this box. He was very clear about this matter. Previously, the agreement between both parties was only about the black mud cream. Now that Rinpochian took out this item, its value wasn't any lower than the black mud cream. After all, his identity determined his way of thinking. I only have these few left. Be careful and take good care of them. If they are used up, then there's nothing I can do. Rinpochian took out another box and placed it on the table beside him. He felt that if it was just to test the composition and find the substance that was effective on the worms, 2 boxes should be enough. As for the other box in his bag, he kept it as a backup. Rinpochian's straightforwardness was somewhat out of Papachin's expectations. Papachin looked at Su Shan and Sun Qing opening and inspecting the boxes as if they had obtained treasures before hurriedly sending them away. Papachin then said to Rinpochian, Bachian, if the research is successful, I will give you 15% of the shares. It was foreseeable that the results of this laboratory would bring in tens of billions of yuan in the future. Originally, Papachin only owned 40% of the shares. If he gave up 15% of the shares, not only would he be handing over hundreds of millions or even billions of yuan of assets to others, but it would also greatly reduce his control over this laboratory and the future pharmaceutical factory. Of course, the prerequisite was that there were results from the research. Even if he lost 15% of the shares, the profits wouldn't be reduced. Something that would affect the future wealth of hundreds of millions of yuan was a huge matter. Naturally, both parties had to sign a new agreement. The reason why he said this now was because there was a lady beside Rinpochian that made him feel pressured. Because of his first impression, he felt that such a lady couldn't be nurtured even by a wealthy merchant family. To be able to nurture such a lady with the temperament of controlling life and death, only a family with a long history in politics or the military would be able to nurture her. Therefore, he expressed his position at the right time to prevent others from feeling that he had taken too much. There were many things that needed to be done appropriately. Forget it, uncle. I have already said that I'm not too interested in these things. Just like what you said to me in the past. When doing business, a win-win situation is the most important. I have always engraved this in my heart. Regardless of whether it is the laboratory or the pharmaceutical factory, you are the one in charge. My mind isn't on them, and I don't care about earning more money. Rinpochian waved his hand and said, when he was in Dayo, he was backed by the entire earth. However, when he was on earth, he was backed by another world. Especially the Empress and the entire Dayo. He really didn't care about earning money. Rinpochian was full of confidence and spoke in an imposing manner. His carefree manner surprised Papachin. In less than a year, he didn't know what this young man had experienced to actually grow to such an extent. He was even willing to hand over the wealth that was easily obtainable. After being slightly surprised, Papachin laughed and said, "If you call me uncle, then I will be taking advantage of you." Both parties chatted for a while and Renbachian rejected Papachin's suggestion again. He didn't say anything else, but he felt that this young man would be very impressive in the future. Chapter 204. Kevin, coupled with sleepiness, went to sleep first. Recently he should have changed the time. Chapter 205. Renbachian and the Empress went shopping in the shopping mall. As long as the Empress set her eyes on a dress, Renbachian would immediately buy it. Halfway through the shopping mall, Renbachian had no choice but to return the huge pile of shopping bags to the car and continue shopping with the Empress. The Empress was in a good mood. However, when they arrived at the underwear store, Renbachian realized that the Empress was still standing outside after taking a few steps. Her footsteps were motionless, and her gaze was wandering. It was unknown where her gaze was focused. Renbachian stood inside and smiled. He casually chose 7 or 8 types of women's underwear and asked the shop assistant to find the right size and wrap them up. The underwear shop assistant also felt that it was a little funny. Women wouldn't take a step into the underwear shop no matter what, but men came in and chose to pack. Such a situation was really rare. When Renbachian came out with the paper bag, the Empress did not even look at him. The customs of Dayo weren't considered conservative. Hot women wearing animal skin skirts could be seen all over the streets. After all, the weather in Dayo was simply too hot. However, the Empress was an exception. Due to her identity, she rarely interacted with the outside world. She always had a dignified look on her face. As a result, she subconsciously felt a little shy when it came to undergarments. After a trip to the mall, the back seat and trunk of the car were almost full. All of them were wearing red dresses. Even though the designs were similar, there were only slight differences. Both of them found another restaurant. Renbachian watched as the Empress ate enough food for 10 people. Even the waiter had a strange look in his eyes when he added more food. Only then did both of them stop eating, or rather, the Empress put down her chopsticks. "Are you full?" Renbachian asked. "Just a little bit more." The Empress wasn't embarrassed about her appetite. The Aboriginals had always had large appetites, let alone someone like her. She had long since automatically ignored the gazes of others. She didn't care what the ants thought of her. Go to another restaurant? Have a taste of other cuisines? Renbachian looked at the plates on the table and asked with a smile. "All right." The Water Empress nodded. The two of them went to 3 restaurants in one night: Shandong cuisine, Hunan cuisine, and finally a dumpling restaurant. After that, they went back and went to deliver everything to the house before they could finally rest. The two of them curled up on the sofa and watched TV. The lights were off, and only the light and sound of the TV could be heard. The movie was the Mandarin version of Transformers. It was the same movie that Renbachian used to scare the Empress. This time he dug it out and found that there were many scenes of modern military combat. Even if they were divided into 10 teams, it would still be hard to avoid being detected, someone answered from below. "As long as one of the teams can find Her Majesty, we will know her location," Hongwu said in a deep voice. Every team of the winged cavalry had a carrier pigeon that was used to send messages. Right now, he was waiting for news from the winged cavalry so that he could personally escort Her Majesty back. Everyone sighed in despair. The longer Her Majesty was in Great Xia, the more dangerous it would be. It was the same for the winged cavalry. Everyone also knew that they could only wait for the winged cavalry's carrier pigeon, as Hongwu had said. "Sir, there's news about Her Majesty." While everyone was still pondering in the room, someone suddenly ran in quickly. Upon hearing this, everyone's face lit up. They were afraid that there wouldn't be any news, and as long as there was news, it was a good thing. "What news? Speak." Hongwu's eyes lit up. Her Majesty killed Hua Sanlu in the 9 pavilions and used poison to destroy the 9 pavilions. Only 2 disciples escaped, the soldier said loudly. The room was silent at first, then everyone burst into an uproar. The information contained in this sentence was too great. Her Majesty actually killed Hua Sanlu. And this was something that no one had expected. Previously, everyone was afraid that Her Majesty would have a conflict with the 9 pavilions. After all, everyone knew Her Majesty's temperament. Coupled with the bunch of lunatics in the 9 pavilions, there was a high possibility of a conflict. Hua Sanlu was ranked 5th in the world, and Her Majesty was ranked 7th. Everyone wasn't optimistic about Her Majesty's chances of winning. The best outcome was that both sides would suffer. Then, Her Majesty would probably be hunted down by the people in the 9 pavilions. Therefore, the winged cavalry took the risk to enter Great Xia and head straight for the 9 pavilions. Along the way, they also searched for traces of Her Majesty. If Hong Wu didn't know that he couldn't catch up with Her Majesty, and that he had to stay in Ping City, he would have gone to the 9 pavilions first. However, no one expected Her Majesty to actually kill Hua Sanlu. This was really beyond everyone's expectations. There was another piece of news that was even more unbelievable than the previous one. Who didn't know what Her Majesty was like? She had always been straightforward. Since when did she know how to use poison? Furthermore, even though the 9 pavilions weren't considered the best in terms of using poison, they weren't too weak either. However, Her Majesty was actually able to poison everyone in the 9 pavilions to death. According to this piece of news, only 2 disciples escaped, and the 8 pavilion masters were also dead? What exactly was going on? This time, Her Majesty only left with Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpochian. Could it be that Rinpochian was an expert in using poison? Furthermore, he was an expert who could destroy the 9 pavilions with poison? This thought emerged in everyone's mind. Other than this, there was no other explanation. Is there any other news? Where is Her Majesty now? Hong Wu suppressed the shock in his heart, and asked in a deep voice. It is said that Her Majesty is seriously injured and her current whereabouts are unknown. Her Majesty reached the 9 pavilions 4 days ago and left on the same day. That soldier continued. Bang! The table under Hong Wu's palm instantly turned into sawdust. At this moment, Qi Shui, which was carrying the Empress and Rinpochian on its back, suddenly stopped running. It lowered its body and looked at the 2 ladies in front of it vigilantly. Both of them were dressed like Taoist nuns. One of them wore a headband on her forehead, and a pendant hung between her eyebrows. She had an ethereal temperament, and was exceptionally beautiful. She didn't look like a woman of this world, and her eyes were as clear and tranquil as a lake. Chapter 206. Hey senior sister, wait for me. You can get others to look for these 7 leaves, but you have to come out and look for them yourself. A 15 or 16-year-old girl in a Taoist robe was bouncing around the mountains like a cheerful deer. Another Taoist nun was carrying a cloth bag. From time to time, she would enter the forest and stop in front of a shrub. She would gently pick a fingernail-sized nut and put it in the cloth bag. This fruit was called 7 leaves. After the outer shell was peeled off, the kernel would be revealed. It was high in oil and sweet in the mouth. It was a favorite snack of many people in Great Xia, and could even be used to extract oil. It was very expensive for ordinary people, who couldn't bear to eat it after picking it in the mountains and sold it in the city. However, this thing was nothing to the Taoist nun. As long as she opened her mouth, countless people would come to her door, and she wouldn't be able to eat it in her lifetime. Therefore, she didn't understand why senior sister would go up the mountain to pick the 7 leaves every year at this time. Moreover, she had to go so far. It was those guys who had picked all the 7 leaves near the Taoist temple. Senior sister, and she had to run for a long time to find this place. Wasn't it all about eating? What was the difference? Wouldn't it be more fragrant if she picked it herself? You will know in the future. The otherworldly woman smiled faintly. Her smile was plain and modest. She was Li Yuanzhu, the 3rd most powerful expert in the world. If Hua Sanlu was said to be the most hated person among the experts, she was the most admired person in Great Xia. Ever since she became famous, she had never killed a single person, nor had her hands been stained with blood. She had always been plain and modest, making people feel close to her. Even a woodcutter or an old woman from a farmer's family wouldn't feel uncomfortable when they saw her. At most, they would say that this girl was really beautiful. This was a woman who was like a fairy in everyone's heart. The other 15 or 16-year-old girl was called Ningqing. She was said to be Li Yuanzhu's junior sister, but in fact, Li Yuanzhu's master had died long ago. Ningqing was just taking in a disciple on behalf of her master. At this moment, she said that she was going to accompany Li Yuanzhu to pick the 7 leaves, but she jumped around the moment she entered the forest. She liked everything she saw, be it a red leaf or a beautiful stone. Occasionally, she would yell and chase after a small beast, but she didn't pick a single 7 leaves. While Li Yuanzhu plucked the 7 leaves, Ningqing played for the whole afternoon before returning to Li Yuanzhu's side. She pretended to help pluck a few leaves, but her eyes were attracted by a few bugs. Li Yuanzhu smiled helplessly when she saw her expression. She was always like this and couldn't stop. Oh right, senior sister, that Qi Zixiao is also very powerful. I heard that she killed Hua Sanlu. Hua Sanlu was ranked 5th in the world. His ranking was even higher than hers, but he was actually killed by her. Ningqing was jumping up and down again. Suddenly, she recalled something she heard and turned her head to say, "Of course." Li Yuanzhu pursed her lips and smiled. I didn't expect Qi Zixiao to come to the Great Xia dynasty. She could have been an emperor, but she went to fight with Hua Sanlu. Ningqing asked curiously. Li Yuanzhu recalled the information she had heard and found it very interesting and unexpected, but she didn't say it out loud. She never liked to talk about such gossip. It would be great if I could meet her. I heard that she is the most beautiful woman in the world. I really want to see what she looks like, but she is definitely not as beautiful as senior sister. Ningqing mumbled again. Her senior sister had a mild temperament and didn't care about anything. However, she paid a lot of attention to the other woman in the top 10 experts in the world. After all, there was a similar age gap between them, and they were the only 2 women in the top 10 experts. It was inevitable that they would often be compared to each other. Ningqing naturally didn't like it and subconsciously felt hostility toward the Empress. The 2 of them walked, picked, and played along the way. After going over another mountain, Li Yuanzhu straightened her body and turned her head to look. She felt a very strong aura rapidly approaching them. Her perception was considered very strong, but it couldn't cover a large range. She only sensed it when the other party was within a kilometer. Senior sister, what's wrong? Ningqing asked curiously. Someone is coming. It's an expert, but his aura is weak. He should be injured, Li Yuanzhu said without much expression. No matter who it was, she wouldn't be too concerned. It was just that Ningqing was beside her, and it wouldn't be good if she didn't pay attention to the other party, and Ningqing got into a conflict. An expert? Senior sister, he must be very powerful if you say he's an expert. He's even injured. Don't tell me it's Qi Zixiao? Ningqing laughed as she spoke. Although she wanted to see that famous woman, the world was so big. It would be too much of a coincidence if they could meet here. No matter how she thought about it, it was impossible. Li Yuanzhu remained silent. Soon, the 2 of them saw a Qilin beast carrying 2 people on its back. It suddenly stopped and stared at them cautiously. Li Yuanzhu raised her eyes and met the cold gaze of the person on the Qilin's back. She was right. How could it be such a coincidence? Li Yuanzhu was surprised. Ningqing was a little curious when she saw the Qilin beast. Then, she looked at the Qilin and the man and woman on its back, especially the woman in red who was full of heroic spirit. Suddenly, a person that she had just mentioned flashed in her mind. She opened her mouth wide in surprise. Was she going to become an immortal? How could she be so accurate? Qi Zixiao. Li Yuanzhu whispered. Although she had never met him, she could recognize him at a glance. After all, he was powerful, dressed in red and riding a Qilin. It would be strange if she didn't know who he was. Li Yuanzhu. The Empress exuded a cold aura. She didn't expect to meet this famous woman here, and she couldn't help but feel that the other party was here to stop her. However, how could she retreat when she saw this woman who was as famous as herself? Even if she was only left with 30% of her strength, she floated down from the Qilin and landed in front of him. Her body was as straight as a spear as she looked at the other party. Ren Baqian looked at her posture and wondered what was going on. Did she meet an expert? Who was Li Yuanzhu? Since the Empress could recognize her at a glance, she couldn't be weak. He thought about it again and seemed to have heard this name before. He quickly tried to recall when he had heard it before. At this moment, Li Yuanzhu smiled and said in a calm and amiable tone, "I don't have any ill intentions. It's just a coincidence. This is fate between you and I. I have heard of you for a long time. Why don't we sit for a while?" "What do you mean?" the Empress asked coldly. "I just want to get to know you when I see you. I naturally won't stop you if you want to leave," Li Yuanzhu said with a smile. Her voice was neither fast nor slow, and it made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Ren Baqian looked at the scene from behind and was sure that she was definitely an expert. She might even be one of the top 10 experts. Her attitude couldn't be faked. She treated him as an equal, and the Empress seemed to be afraid of her. At the thought of this, he suddenly remembered who she was. Li Yuanzhu, the third most powerful expert in the world. Wasn't she the one? He had heard someone mention her before, but he didn't take it to heart and didn't think about it for a while. Ren Baqian was shocked when he realized the other party's identity. Even at her peak, the Empress might not be able to defeat her, let alone now that she only had 30% of her strength. Fortunately, she didn't show any ill intentions. However, the Empress was still standing there like a telephone pole. After all, she wasn't the type to be at loggerheads with you one minute and sit down to drink and chat merrily the next. However, she couldn't possibly keep standing like this, right? In any case, the other party had shown goodwill. It was better not to show hostility at this time, and wait until she recovered. She immediately shouted, "We have meat, do you have wine?" There was silence. Li Yuanzhu didn't expect that the man she didn't pay much attention to would speak at this time, and even say such a thing. A gentle smile appeared on her delicate face. "We don't have wine, but we have qi. I picked it myself and will treat you to a meal." After a while the four of them sat together. The Empress and Li Yuanzhu looked at each other and didn't speak. One was cold, while the other was gentle. They were two completely different people. However, when the two of them sat together, the wilderness made people feel like they were in a fairyland. Ningqing looked at the Empress curiously, and then at Ren Baqian. She thought to herself, so Qi Zixiao is like this. She is indeed very beautiful. So this is the gigolo that she found. I really can't see what's so special about him. Ren Baqian looked at the two of them looking at each other without speaking, and felt a little bored. However, he didn't expect the third most powerful expert in the world to be so gentle. He always thought that the top 10 experts in the world were as domineering as the Empress. After all, an expert had to have the demeanor of an expert. The other girl, who was about 15 or 16 years old, looked at the Empress and then at him. She looked like she was looking at a rare animal, which made him feel a little awkward. "Senior sister is more beautiful," Ningqing suddenly said after looking at her for a long time, breaking the silence in the field. Other than her, no one else would have seen these two peerless experts say such words when they were together. Li Yuanzhu looked apologetic, stretched out her lily-white hand, and gently patted Ningqing's head twice, blaming her for talking nonsense. Ren Baqian felt that the Empress's body and face became even colder. After thinking about it, he felt that the Empress and Li Yuanzhu were currently in a state of defeating you with their eyes. He had an obligation to help the Empress regain her dignity. However, it was hard to tell who was better in terms of appearance, as they were both different. In terms of martial arts, Li Yuanzhu was the third most powerful expert in the world, and the Empress didn't seem to have anything to be proud of. Ren Baqian's eyes lit up as he looked at her. Zixiao has big breasts. Ren Baqian killed her with a single blow. Li Yuanzhu was as beautiful as a fairy and had an otherworldly aura that made her seem like a fairy who had fallen into the mortal world by mistake. However, she had a flat chest, at least in his eyes. Not only her, but the person beside her was also like this. As a result, Ren Baqian's words were extremely lethal. Ningqing looked at the Empress's chest, looked at her senior, and then lowered her head to look at herself. Immediately, her face turned ugly. Even a lady like Li Yuanju had her otherworldly aura shattered by this sentence. She subconsciously glanced at the Empress, and her ears turned slightly red. Chapter 207. Ren Baqian had stabbed both of them in the heart. It was a stab in the heart. Even Li Yuanju's calm demeanor was broken. She was embarrassed and annoyed, let alone Ning Qing. Her mouth was so red that a soy sauce bottle could be hung on it. She glared at him with extreme hatred, and wished she could bite off a piece of meat. Ren Baqian then acted as if nothing had happened. He took out a packet of spiced beef and said, "Do you want to try it? It's a specialty from my place and tastes pretty good." Li Yuanju didn't know what to do with such a person. She had a hard time when she was young. When she grew up, everyone treated her with respect. For 10 years, no one had treated her like this, giving her a red date after giving her a slap. Did he think she was a child? However, she really couldn't lose her temper. It seemed that she hadn't been angry for a long time. Although Ren Baqian's words broke her calmness, it only made her feel a little embarrassed. At the same time, she found it a little funny. This person was really bold. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was extremely daring. He actually dared to say such words in front of Qi Zixiao. Although Qi Zixiao glared at him with a murderous look, she actually didn't lose her temper. This made her a little curious. After all, she had heard a lot about Qi Zixiao's temperament. This person was indeed as weak as the rumors said. His appearance could only be considered delicate, and was far from handsome. Not only was Qi Zixiao willing to take risks for him, but she also tolerated him at this time. It was really strange. Li Yuanju really wanted to know why Qi Zixiao treated him like this. However, she was only curious. She had always been calm and impulsive, and she rarely paid too much attention to the outside world. In fact, she would probably forget about this matter after a few days, so naturally she wouldn't ask. At this moment, the atmosphere was broken. She said, "I have long wanted to meet the famous Empress of Dayo, but Lan City is too far away. I didn't expect to have such an opportunity today. So what if I see her?" The Empress said coldly. She didn't have any thoughts about Li Yuanju. She didn't even hate her after seeing her, but she was still somewhat unconvinced. She was ranked 7th, and now she was ranked 5th. The other party was ranked 3rd. It was a pity that she only had 30% of her strength left. Otherwise, she would have given it a try. "Your reputation is well-deserved." Li Yuanju smiled gently. "Emph." The Empress snorted. Ningqing looked at Li Yuanju and then at the Empress, feeling displeased. "Senior sister is such a good person. Why do you keep snorting? Not to mention that you're seriously injured right now. Even if you were in perfect condition, you wouldn't be able to defeat senior sister. Senior sister is number 3 in the world," Ningqing said proudly as she raised her head. "Li Yuanju is ranked 3rd in the world, and you're only ranked 7th. What's there to be arrogant about? Besides, you're seriously injured." It was a very simple and childish thought. After all, he was only 15 or 16 years old, and had grown up in a Taoist temple. He did not know much about the ways of the world, and his personality was jumpy. Everyone in the monastery doted on her, and she did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. However, these words caused the Empress to become even colder. Her eyes were filled with battle intent. If not for her severe injuries, she would have started fighting immediately. Sorry, she has a childish temperament. Li Yuanju apologized with a sincere look in her eyes. Then he turned to look at Ningqing. "Don't talk nonsense again, or I won't bring you out next time." However, his tone was not stern at all. Ren Baqian pondered. He was still a child. His next sentence should be, "Don't ever let her off, right?" What would they do when they grew up? What was the point of having the police? However, what she said was the truth. At most, he would be reprimanded for talking nonsense and making an unintentional mistake. However, this would be even more hurtful. "Zixiao has big breasts," Ren Baqian said with certainty. Ren Baqian felt that he was Feng Qingyang now. His 9 swords beyond the swords were specialized in breaking all kinds of techniques. Nothing could cover up his mediocrity. Breasts. Things. However, he also took advantage of Li Yuanju's good temper. She was obviously angry, but she still had to maintain her poise. Although such a person was number 3 in the world, he was easy to bully. If it was someone else, let alone number 3, even if he was number 10 in the world, Ren Baqian might not dare to poke at their wounds. Ningqing's face turned green. She had never hated someone so much in her life. If she could, she would bite him to death. The smile on Li Yuanzhu's face could no longer be maintained. It was not easy to get over the matter just now, but Ren Baqian poked both of their chests again. For the first time, she felt that she hated this person a little. The Empress was about to fly into a rage out of humiliation. Her ears were completely red, and she wanted to slap the guy beside her to death. However, when she saw the stiff smile on Li Yuanzhu's face, she immediately withdrew her coldness and smiled instead. When she withdrew her coldness and smiled like a flower, it was exceptionally captivating. This smile disappeared in a flash. After all, winning in this aspect wasn't something to be proud of. In her heart, strength was always the first priority. You have seen enough. I'm leaving, the Empress said. She lifted Ren Baqian's collar and landed on Qi Shui's back in a few flashes. She still had the attitude of a victor. The two of them stopped and sat with each other for a while. Ren Baqian ruthlessly stabbed both of them in the heart. When they passed by, Qi Zixiao raised her hand and threw a bottle at them. Li Yuanzhu subconsciously caught it. Only when the Kirin was nowhere to be seen did Ningqing scream hysterically. That slut! How could Qi Zixiao be so blind as to fall for him? Senior, why didn't you slap him to death? He actually dared to compare you with Qi Zixiao. Li Yuanzhu shook her head slightly and was speechless. That guy was simply a jerk. She looked at the bottle in her hand. It was like white jade, and the fragrance of wine wafted out after unscrewing it. Was he treating her to a drink? Li Yuanzhu smiled at the thought of this. Senior, why are you still smiling? I'm so pissed, Ningqing said resentfully. After the two of them were far away, Ren Baqian smiled and said, Zixiao, I have avenged you. It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned this. Now that he mentioned it, the Empress was furious. Since when did she rely on this to suppress others? Also, what were his eyes looking at? She had really embarrassed herself today. Moreover, it was in front of Li Yuanzhu. Although she had already realized that this world didn't seem to care much about this, and there were always models wearing underwear on TV and bikinis on the beach, she still found it hard to accept. She really wanted to slap Ren Baqian, but in the end, she couldn't do it. After holding back her anger for a long time, and thinking about Li Yuanzhu's expression just now, she felt an inexplicable sense of pleasure and satisfaction. The two of them traveled for another day. When they crossed a mountain, they heard a series of battle cries. Both of them rode on Qi Shui and looked down from the mountain ridge. All they could see was chaos below. One of them was the Great Xia army with a few thousand soldiers. The other side was leaping and launching a surprise attack towards the army. More than 100 figures charged towards the front of the army formation. The tens of people at the front braved the rain of arrows and leaped into the army formation. However, tens of figures also leaped out from the army formation and blocked them so that they wouldn't be disrupted by the attack. At this moment, the people at the back of the group leaped up and landed in the formation, setting off a rain of blood. This is the winged cavalry? The Empress took a closer look and recognized the identity of these people. After all, she couldn't be more familiar with the equipment of the winged cavalry. However, why were they here and even colliding with the Great Xia army? At this moment, the formation of the Great Xia army suddenly changed. Other than the soldiers that were entangled, the others formed a circle under the command of the winged cavalry and surrounded the group of more than 100 people and their opponents. Chapter 208. Die. One of the burly men laughed maniacally. The long saber in his hand pierced through the air and slashed at his opponent. Then he brought the other saber in front of him. These two fellows cooperated well. Two advanced manual experts were actually able to block a few of his moves, but that was as far as they could go. With a turn of his body, the long saber changed direction, and the head of the other opponent flew into the sky. Then, he shouted loudly and was about to split the opponent that he had just slashed into two when he was suddenly stopped by several spears from the side. The burly man had a look of contempt on his face. With a casual swing of his saber, the hands that were holding the spears immediately lost control, and the spears flew into the sky. However, those people didn't stop and immediately moved away. The people behind them continued to stab with their spears. This was the centipede formation used by Great Xia during the battle with the Aboriginals. The advantage of the Aboriginal warriors was too great. Even if the number of Great Xia soldiers was 10 times that of the Aboriginals, it would be difficult to achieve victory on the battlefield without relying on this battle formation. Needless to say, they were facing the elites of the Aboriginals, the winged cavalry. Although there were only slightly more than 100 of them, all of them were at the earthwell level. Even 5,000 elite soldiers would find it difficult to resist them. The difference in strength was too great. Therefore, after the Great Xia generals arranged for dozens of people to block the first batch of Aboriginal warriors, they immediately launched the centipede formation and eliminated these 100 people. This kind of situation occurred in many places on the battlefield. After the winged cavalry warriors killed and repelled their opponents, they discovered that they had to face opponents that moved quickly and held spears that were like centipedes with hundreds of legs. A bunch of bastards. One of the winged cavalry warriors cut off all the spears around him like a spinning top. The long saber in his hand turned into a white line and cut off 5 or 6 heads. Suddenly, a spear pierced toward his waist at an extremely fast speed. The winged cavalry warrior grabbed the spear with one hand, making it difficult for his opponent to advance. Then he flicked the spear upward, and his opponent quickly let go of his hands. This was the result of many years of combat experience. These people were all Great Xia captains who were at the beginner level of the man wheel. They had fought with the Aboriginals more than once and were able to survive. Regardless of strength or reaction, they were much stronger than the rest. However, in the next second he saw a flash of saber light in front of him in horror. His entire body was directly sent flying from his chest. If it was an ordinary Aboriginal warrior facing the centipede formation, it was very likely that he would be obstructed by the surrounding spear formations. However, he wasn't facing an ordinary Aboriginal warrior, but the elite winged cavalry. One of the soldiers chopped off a few more heads with a backhand. When his gaze swept across the surroundings, his body suddenly paused. A long spear had directly left a bloody mark under his armpit. The soldier chopped off the heads of the 2 people in front of him with a backhand. His face was filled with joy as he shouted, "Your Majesty!" Upon hearing this sound, all the Aboriginal warriors revealed a look of joy and looked in the direction of the sound. Many of them didn't manage to dodge in time, and ended up with a few wounds on their bodies. However, many people saw a red figure rushing towards them from afar. Who else could it be but His Majesty? "Your Majesty! We've found Her Majesty!" Everyone cheered excitedly, not forgetting to slash their opponents to death. A middle-aged general at the back of the Great Xia battle formation was originally frowning as he looked at the battlefield. Based on the current situation, even if these 5,000 elite soldiers could eliminate more than 100 winged cavalry warriors, they would at least lose 70% of their men. This was an optimistic estimate, and the possibility of both sides suffering losses was very high. It was a pity that there wasn't a crossbow battalion. If there was, this wouldn't have happened. One had to know that these were all battle-hardened elite soldiers. Although the merciful didn't command soldiers, his heart was bleeding. The only consolation was that these were, after all, the most elite winged cavalry warriors of Dayo. At least 1/10 of them were here. And even if these 5,000 elite soldiers were to be sacrificed, it wouldn't be considered a loss. At this moment, he heard the yells of the winged cavalry warriors in the battle formation. His facial expression changed drastically. Sitting on the back of his horse, he saw a red figure rushing in his direction. "Stop her!" the general shouted, but he was distressed. Why did Qi Zixiao appear at this time? He had already invested all his troops to surround these winged cavalry warriors. Together with Qi Zixiao, there was simply no way to stop them. He could only hope that Qi Zixiao was seriously injured as rumored. However, he didn't have any expectations as he looked at the figure that was rushing over from afar. Even if she was seriously injured, they wouldn't be able to stop her. Furthermore, looking at her current speed, she didn't look like she was injured at all. Half of the hundreds of winged cavalry warriors that surrounded him immediately turned their horses and rushed toward the red figure. The Empress's face was ice cold. Facing the 50 to 60 winged cavalry warriors, she leaped into the air. Just like how she stepped on human skulls on Earth, it didn't matter if they dodged or brandished their sabers. To the Empress, there was practically no difference. In a single move, more than a dozen of the winged cavalry warriors fell from their horses. Before that happened, they were already dead. These 50 to 60 winged cavalry warriors couldn't even stop her for half a step. When the remaining people turned their horses around, they could only see the back of the Empress charging in their direction. Shoot! The middle-aged general looked at the scene in front of him and trembled slightly. He forcefully controlled his voice and gave the order. He smiled bitterly. His 5,000 elite soldiers were entangled with the winged cavalry and couldn't move at all. Regardless of whether he retreated or not, he would still die. It's over, it's all over. At this moment, the only hope in his heart was that a few more people could escape and kill a few more winged cavalry warriors. The remaining people had already drawn their bows and nocked their arrows. Upon hearing the order, they immediately released their bows. 50 to 60 arrows pierced through the air and flew straight toward the lady in red. The Empress stretched out her hand and grabbed. 6 or 7 arrows appeared in her hand. As for the rest, she brushed them aside. With a flip of her hand, the 6 or 7 arrows flew back. 3 of them directly missed, 2 of them penetrated the horse's buttocks, and 1 of them was lucky enough to hit one of the winged cavalry warriors. Seeing this, the Empress's face turned even colder. After brushing aside the second round of arrows, she immediately appeared on a horse and smashed that man's head with one hand. Taking advantage of the situation, she pounced toward the general who was surrounded in the middle. Immediately, 3 figures on their horses soared into the sky. These 3 people actually had the strength of an earthwheel expert. However, they were smashed to the ground one after another. The Empress smashed that general's head with one palm. Carrying the corpse, she leaped out of the crowd and shouted, "The great Xia general is dead. Kill." Her cold voice spread throughout the battlefield. Kill. The winged cavalry warriors laughed heartily and shouted. At this moment, the fatigue from the past few days couldn't be found on their bodies. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Avenge the general. This weak voice was immediately drowned out. However, that general's personal guard still had the determination to die and rushed toward the Empress with a sorrowful look on his face. After knowing that their general was dead, the morale of the great Xia soldiers plummeted. Coupled with the fact that there was no one to command them, they collapsed in no time and began to flee in all directions. Your Majesty! More than 10 winged cavalry warriors rushed to the Empress's side. Their faces were full of reverence. At this moment, the ground around her was already filled with corpses. Kill them and come back in the time it takes to burn an incense stick, the Empress said coldly. Yes. Other than a captain who remained by the Empress's side, the rest of the people broke into a run and chased after the great Xia soldiers who had scattered. Renbaqian watched the bloody massacre of this era from the ridge, and then saw the Empress charge alone. In particular, those shouts of kill made his blood boil. However, it was only blood boil. Chapter 209. By the time he reached the foot of the mountain, the winged cavalry warriors had already returned. The ground was full of severed limbs. There were no injured people, only scattered limbs. The air was filled with the smell of blood, which made Renbaqian's nose uncomfortable. However, he resisted the urge to cover his nose. Even though he wasn't used to it, it would be too pretentious of him to cover his nose when these winged cavalry warriors entered deep into Great Xia to search for the Empress and engaged in a fierce battle. The Empress had been standing there all along. The lieutenant beside her was actually someone she knew. It was Teng Ji from the previous time. However, when he saw Renbaqian, he didn't give him any face. After all, the Empress had put herself in danger because of him. It was already good enough that the others didn't attack him the moment they met. He couldn't even dream of being nice to them. Ren Baqian could think of this, so he didn't mind. He just felt a little helpless. Previously, he had always been with the Empress and Ren Baqian, so he didn't pay much attention to this matter. Now that he had encountered it, there was nothing he could do. Not long after Ren Baqian left the mountain, many winged cavalry warriors who had chased after the stragglers returned one after another. Their bodies were covered in blood. Not only them, but the Empress's body was also stained with a lot of blood. Each of them had a simple smile on their faces, but their bodies reeked of blood, making people feel the cruelty of this world. Your Majesty! Everyone knelt on one knee in front of the Empress. Get up, the Empress said. Her voice was dignified, but it wasn't cold. No matter who saw this kind of subordinate, they would not have a cold face anymore. Why are you guys here? The Empress asked. The winged cavalry swears to follow Her Majesty to the death. Everyone shouted in unison. The Empress's expression softened a little. She looked at everyone's faces and then became stern again. Where are the others? Your Majesty, we will split into 10 teams to search for Your Majesty. The others will take other routes. There should be 2 teams that are closer to here. Tungji raised his head and said. Everyone get up, the Empress said again. As for these people, she could only say that they were burdens, but she did not say it out loud. After all, there was a huge disparity between the winged cavalry's mount and Qi Shui's speed. Moreover, the more people there were, the bigger the target. Yes. Everyone stood up. How are the casualties? The Empress asked again. Tungji turned around and looked at everyone. Line up. Over 100 people stood loosely in 4 rows. Tungji carefully looked from the front to the back. Where are the other 2 people? Look for it. Everyone knew that if he didn't return now, he couldn't have chased after the scattered soldiers. He must be among the corpses on the ground. There were at least 600 to 700 corpses on the ground. In the short period of battle just now, 600 to 700 elite soldiers of Great Xia were lying here. In addition to the scattered soldiers who were killed, the total number of casualties was more than 1,500. However, there were only deaths and no injuries. On the other hand, 2 winged cavalry warriors had died in battle. If the Empress hadn't killed the commander, the winged cavalry would have suffered even more casualties as time passed. After a while, the Empress looked at the 2 corpses that were being carried over and said, "Take them away first and give them an elaborate burial when we return." Everyone knew that it was impossible to bring the corpses back, as they would stink halfway. However, they had to bring the 2 corpses to a safe place first. They would bring the heads back, but the corpses would be buried in the mountains without leaving a tombstone. When Aboriginal warriors died outside, this was how they usually dealt with it. The heroic spirit and head would be brought back to the 60,000 mountains to be buried. The heroic spirit would protect the Aboriginals forever. It was the same when they tried to kill the 7th prince. Inform the other 2 troops to wait for them at a place that is 1 day's journey away. The rest of the troops will return to Dayo, the Empress said. Yes, Your Majesty. Should we inform General Hongwu? Tungji asked. Make the arrangements. The Empress waved her hand. Tungji immediately called for someone to contact the other troops. The rest of the troops also returned to look for their mounts. Many of them took a glance at Ren Baqian before they left. They wanted to see what kind of scoundrel made the Empress take such a risk for him. At this moment, Ren Baqian's mood was similar to Rene's in Saving Soldier Rene. His mood was somewhat complicated. The winged cavalry warriors had their own method of communication. It was an animal that was the size of a hummingbird. They were called Yinyao. There were 2 of them, and they would live and die together. When one of them was released, it would automatically return to the other's side. It was very magical. No one knew how they found each other. In just a few moments, 5 or 6 pitch-black shifting birds flew out from the distance, quickly flying in different directions. Every troop had a few Yinyao birds in their hands. The other troops would then communicate with each other. After a while, many of the winged cavalry warriors returned with those giant goats. The 2 dead soldiers were tied to the backs of their mounts. When they saw the Great Xia army just now, they immediately got down from their mounts and let them hide further away. These goats were also very smart. They didn't run too far away, and waited by the side to graze. The so-called winged cavalry looked like cavalry, but in fact, they were a group of infantrymen who rode on their mounts. After all, the restrictions on their mounts were too great, and they couldn't unleash their full strength. "Let's go back," the Empress said to everyone. Her voice spread across the entire battlefield. Her figure flashed and landed behind Rinpochian. She then sat sideways on top of him. "Let's go." Many of the winged cavalry let out a strange cry that sounded very primitive and barbaric. One after another, they followed behind Chishui. The hundreds of winged cavalry almost gave off the grandeur of tens of thousands of galloping horses. The earth trembled along with them. The Aboriginals' weight couldn't go unnoticed. At this moment, a caravan was advancing on the plains. More than 10 carriages were filled with goods. There were also dozens of odd-job workers and martial artists leading the caravan. Among them, a dignified-looking martial artist in his 40s seemed to have sensed something. He instructed the person beside him, "Lu Air, listen to see if there's any movement." Following his command, a young man quickly dismounted from his horse and pressed his ear to the ground. Following which, he sprinted a few steps and leaped onto the horse's back. "Boss, there's cavalry coming in our direction." The middle-aged man nodded. This was the hinterland of Great Xia, and cavalry could be seen occasionally. There weren't any bandits nearby, so there was no need to worry. However, for safety's sake, he still leaned against a carriage and knocked on it. "Manager, there's cavalry coming in our direction." A man with a round face, who looked like a rich man, came out of the carriage and shouted, "Stop first." "Manager, do you want to set up a formation first?" "Just in case," the middle-aged man asked again. The manager waved his hand and said, "There's no need. There won't be any bandits here. Everyone just wait here for a while." He had traveled this route every year, and he had never heard of any bandits appearing here. Yu City was 25 kilometers away. Not to mention the experts in the government and army, there was also the Qingyang sect on the mountain outside the city. There were 3 earthwheel experts in the sect, and the bandits would be courting death if they appeared here. As soon as the convoy stopped, everyone felt the ground shake and dust rise in the distance. There's quite a number of them. The middle-aged man subconsciously thought that it was impossible to cause such a tremor if there were only a few of them. There had to be at least 500 of them. Maybe they're from the army. Didn't they say that Qi Zixiao was in Dayo recently? I'm afraid they're looking for her. The manager narrowed his eyes and guessed. So what if they find her? The middle-aged man shook his head slightly. At most, there were earthwill experts in the army, and they weren't on the same level as spirit-will experts. No matter how many of them there were, they wouldn't be able to stop her. Although he was only an advanced man-will expert, he had heard a lot about the strength of spirit-will experts due to his family background. The man sat on the horse and looked in that direction. After a while, he could see some shadows in front of him. Following which, his expression changed drastically. At the front was an unknown monster that was carrying a person. Behind it wasn't a horse at all, but a goat. It was the kind of giant goat that was most commonly seen in Dayo. Only the Aboriginals loved to ride this kind of mount. When he realized this, his expression changed drastically and he shouted, "It's not the Great Xia cavalry, it's the Dayo people. Why are the Dayo people here? Don't care about the goods, run." The manager's expression also changed after hearing his words. "How is this possible? Why are the Dayo people here? No, we can't lose the goods. Ordinary Aboriginal soldiers are at the Manwil level. How can those who can come here be ordinary soldiers? They can't stop them at all. Why should we care about the goods? They can't take them away." The middle-aged man lifted him up as he shouted. He simply didn't care about anything else, turned his horse around, and galloped in the direction of Yuqing. The rest of the people's expressions changed drastically as they fled in all directions. As for the goods, they simply couldn't care less. Just like what the man said, the Aboriginals couldn't take the goods away. At this moment, escaping was the most important thing. The odd-job workers hated their parents for not giving them 2 more legs. The middle-aged man spurred his horse forward and looked back from time to time. After a while, he saw that the Dayo people didn't have any intention of chasing after them, and directly headed for Mount Yuyang. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. After all the aboriginals had entered Mount Yuyang, he then instructed, "Go and inform the officials of Yucheng." After waiting for a long time, he spurred his horse back. Ren Baqian sat on the back of Qi Shui and saw these people fleeing in all directions from afar. However, even if they didn't run, he couldn't be bothered with them. After all, so many defeated soldiers had fled just now, and those who should have been informed had already been informed. Everyone entered Mount Yuyang and ran all the way to the depths. Regardless of whether it was Qi Shui or those giant mountain goats, they were very good at running and jumping in the forest. The complex terrain of the forest didn't hinder them at all, and it was difficult for the Great Xia army to catch up. Everyone rested for a while every 2 hours. At night, they spent the night in the depths of Mount Yuyang. The Empress and Ren Baqian sat next to a bonfire. Ren Baqian was roasting meat for the Empress while the rest stayed far away. However, they could still smell the aroma coming from the bonfire. It was obviously the same thing, but they always felt that the aroma coming from the bonfire was exceptionally alluring. At daybreak the next day, everyone got up and set off again. Half a day later, they stopped at a mountain ridge. This was the place where Teng Ji and the other 2 teams had agreed to meet. Qingyang sect leader, Lu Kanjun sent someone to see you. A burly man hurriedly entered the room and said, "I won't meet him, even if I am possessed by the devil and am seriously injured." The old man in the room replied without even lifting his eyelids. If he didn't know about this news, he might as well meet him. Since he already knew about it, he might as well close the door and refuse to meet him. Sect leader, why don't we meet him? In any case, we should at least listen to what he has to say. That burly man had a strange look on his face. How could the Qingyang sect's martial arts be possessed by the devil? Furthermore, the relationship between the Qingyang sect and the officials had always been pretty good. There was no need to be so extreme, right? Yesterday, a group of aboriginals entered Mount Yuyang. The old man saw that he was puzzled and casually told him about it. So what? The burly man didn't understand what was going on. Even though the aboriginals weren't weak, it shouldn't be to the extent of being scared to this extent just by hearing the name. Seeing that he was stupid, the old man shook his head angrily. A group of more than 100 people, and all of them are Dayo's winged cavalry. Even the weakest among them is at the earth will level like you and me. Among them, Qi Zixiao is also among them. Lu Kanjun is courting death by dragging our Qingyang sect into this. If you want to take a look, you can go ahead. Chapter 210. Ren Baqian, the Empress, and more than 100 winged cavalry warriors waited on the mountain ridge from noon until late at night. It was not until the next morning that one group arrived, but there was still no sign of the other group. The group of winged cavalry didn't encounter any trouble along the way, but they encountered a group of about 1,000 cavalry warriors on their way here. They were immediately killed, and more than half of them escaped. Ren Baqian suspected that the group of winged cavalry warriors had encountered some trouble. For example, they encountered a large number of elite Great Xia soldiers like the group that he and the Empress had encountered. He was afraid that it would be somewhat dangerous. If they continued to wait, the Great Xia army might have already received the news and set up camp outside. However, he didn't bring it up. He was the one who had the least right to speak here. The Empress was here for him, and these winged cavalry warriors were here to look for the Empress. Could he suggest not to wait anymore? Unless he had no other choice, Ren Baqian knew that he would absolutely not say it. Let's continue to wait. At worst, we can go back and get some nightshade and pralidoxime. Those things are much easier to get than sarin gas, Ren Baqian thought to himself. Back then, the Empress brought back 2 packs of sarin gas. One was used in the 9 pavilions, and the other was still hanging on Qi Shui's back. Originally, Ren Baqian wanted to bring it back to Dayo for safekeeping. In the future, when the war started, he would throw it at the main army of Great Xia. He was afraid that most of them would die. However, if he were to throw it here, it would be gone after it was used. Back then, the Empress had wiped out all the sarin gas stored by that organization. That organization's factory had also been bombed, so there was probably no chance for it to be produced again. Renbachian lay on a big rock and looked at the blue sky and white clouds above his head. He was unhurriedly thinking. The Empress was sitting not far away. Some of the 300 winged cavalry warriors dispersed to prepare to receive that group of people, while others hunted in the mountains. They waited from morning to night. Everyone had been waiting here for a day and a half. At this moment, someone suddenly shouted from afar. The winged cavalry warriors who were preparing to slaughter looked up with joy. Are they here? Renbachian tilted his head to look at their reaction, and thought to himself. Very quickly, a group of goat riders came bouncing over from afar. A group of murderous burly men hopped forward on goats. The scene was very beautiful, and could definitely shatter many people's fantasies about the profession of knights. If this were to be filmed, people would definitely not be able to look straight at it. However, Renbachian had seen it many times over the past 2 days, and was getting used to it. That kind of giant mountain goat was like a scamper. On flat ground, it wasn't as fast as a horse, but it was really good in the mountains. There were very few terrains that could stop it. Your Majesty, please forgive us for our tardiness. More than 100 people got off their mounts and knelt down on one knee. From the looks of it, they did not encounter any trouble. Their armor was not broken, and there were no bloodstains on their bodies. It's good that you are here. Get up, the Empress said faintly. After everyone stood up, the Empress asked, "Why are you only here now?" The Empress asked casually. After all, they didn't look like they had fought before. The captain's face twitched for a long time. He turned around and kicked the person behind him away before saying awkwardly, "That bastard led us the wrong way." The faces of the others also twitched for a long time. They all looked at the burly man from the corner of their eyes, as if they were looking at him with disdain. Renbachian looked at them from a short distance away and laughed out loud. If they weren't enemies, this group of fellows were actually rather simple and honest and cute, even though they had the halo of being a pig teammate most of the time. Let's rest first. We will set off tomorrow morning. The Empress waved her hand to let them find a place to rest. Renbachian pondered for a long time, moved closer to the Empress and said, "It has already been 3 days. There are still 2 more days before we return. How long more do we have to walk in this mountain?" The Empress called Tungji over and inquired about it. Only then did she know that based on everyone's speed, they still needed 1.5 days to descend the mountain. Then they would use half a day to pass through the plains and enter the next mountain range. Will the Great Xia army be waiting for us there? Renbachian inquired. Tungji revealed his white teeth and said, "We will just kill them all before heading over." After that, how do we go? Renbachian asked again. Tungji looked at the Empress before replying. After that, we will enter Mount Lianin. After going over it, we will reach a gorge called the Falling Moon Gorge. There is a big river blocking the way. The widest part of the river is more than 1 kilometer. Furthermore, the river is turbulent and there are strange fish that eat people. There will probably be Great Xia soldiers blocking the way. Furthermore, according to the time, the experts from Great Xia will probably arrive by then. However, the good thing is that Hongwu will probably send experts from the army to wait for everyone there. After passing through that gorge, it will be the border. On the contrary, there won't be many intercepting forces there. This was because if they mobilized their army to intercept them, Dayo wouldn't just sit and watch. They would directly bypass Chiyun Pass and destroy their anus. He took a bath first and pondered what he should bring along as he bathed. It would be great if he had the strength of 800 kilograms like the Aboriginals. A ton of TNT could even flatten half a mountain, let alone the Great Xia army. If the Empress fired a Gatling gun with 700 to 800 kilograms of bullets, he could sit on Qi Shui and play the background music. The background music of bravely charging into Deadly Island would suffice. It was a pity that he only had the strength of 160 kilograms, which was the strength of an ordinary man. Those who did manual labor often had more strength than him. Chapter 211. After taking a bath and changing his clothes, Renbachian felt much more refreshed. He gave Sushan a call. He had saved her number after she called him previously. "Lucky boy, what's the matter? I'm busy right now," Sushan immediately said after the call was connected. This lucky fellow had become Renbachian's good friend. After all, he was always the one who brought good things. Even when he was poisoned, he was able to cure leukemia, a world-class terminal illness. Furthermore, he was still safe and sound in the end. At this point in time, Renbachian had the feeling of someone who used to call him Xiao Tian Tian when they were together, but now called him Madame Neo. Now that the antidote was in her hands, she turned her back on him. "I want the antidote made from nightshade and pralidoxime to neutralize the neurotoxin. I must have it. Enough for 1,000 people." Renbachian even included the giant goat mounts. "Why do you need so much?" Sushan was a little surprised. This thing wasn't difficult to obtain, but Renbachian specifically mentioned that it was used to detoxify the neurotoxin. Furthermore, it was for 1,000 people. It was inevitable that she would be surprised. "I'm useful. The sooner, the better. How long will it take?" "You can report the expenses to me when the time comes," Renbachian said directly. "The hospital has it, but it's too big. I have to ask my classmate for help. Maybe the day after tomorrow." "All right, I will go and collect it the day after tomorrow." Renbachian hung up the phone after he finished speaking. He sat in front of the computer and began to search for information on various weapons. Although he still had 10 kilograms of sarin gas on hand, it would be gone once he used it up. It would be very difficult to get more. He looked up the modern fog on the internet. In fact, there were many things that could be used, such as white phosphorus bombs and solid gasoline bombs. They were not heavy, but they were very lethal. This was especially true for the soldiers outside the bunker. The people of this world had no concept of what this thing was, nor did they know how to avoid it. If it was directly thrown at them, they probably wouldn't even react. If he were to encounter another expert who could strike down with a sword flower, the scene would be too horrible to look at. The only drawback was that it was too inhumane. If it was the Renbachian who had just arrived in this world, he wouldn't have even thought about using such a weapon. But now, he had seen many dead people, and he was becoming more and more indifferent to human life. Renbachian looked around and sighed. There were many good things, but it was a pity that he couldn't get his hands on any of them. Renbachian increasingly felt that the restrictions were too great. Whenever he wanted to use something, he found that he could only think about it. Even the sarin gas was snatched from that organization by the Empress's formidable strength. He closed the page that was searching for weapons, and began to search for other things. For example, drones. These things were more or less useful. At the very least, they could see where the enemy's forces were, and where the enemy's weaknesses were at a glance. Of course, it was very likely that the enemy's weaknesses were actually the enemy's experts. However, it was more or less useful as a reference. This kind of thing was sold in the city. After checking online, he went downstairs and drove there. Half an hour later, Renbachian came out with 2 boxes that cost more than 40,000 yuan each. It could fly for 27 minutes, and its horizontal flight speed was 94 kilometers per hour. In other words, it could travel more than 20 kilometers in a single direction before returning. It was much more powerful than what Renbachian had imagined. However, the wireless signal of the drone could only travel 5 kilometers at most. This was the current limit. Moreover, there were no satellites or networks, so it could only send back pictures. Perhaps there was something better, but it was not available now. 5 kilometers was more than enough for Renbachian. Before the other party discovered him, he was already able to clearly see through the other party's arrangements. This kind of equipment was simply too powerful in that world where there wasn't any interference. In the future, if he were to get a few drones and place them at the front line, he would be able to detect the enemy's every move. Other than the drones, he also bought some spare batteries so that he could rotate them and use them when needed. After which, he went to buy 5 binoculars, 10 walkie-talkies, 2 solar power batteries, and a set of solar panels. Only then was everything ready. When he was driving back, he saw a few young men and women dressed in cosplay clothes by the roadside. They seemed to be students. One of the girls was wearing a red Han Chinese dress with a phoenix embroidered on it. Rinpoche fell in love with it at first glance. The Empress would definitely look very beautiful in it. Rinpoche parked his car by the roadside and jogged to the few of them. They immediately looked at him vigilantly, especially when they noticed that he had stopped his car just now. Did he come to strike up a conversation because he felt that he was rich? There were many such incidents in novels and on television. Especially recently, there was an incident of placing drinks on the roof of a car to represent the price. These students were very hostile to people who drove to strike up a conversation. "Excuse me, may I know where the clothes are made?" Rinpoche greeted the few of them with a smile. His tone was very polite, and he pointed to the young lady who was surrounded in the middle. In fact, the young lady in the middle was also the prettiest. She had an exquisite face and fair skin. In particular, the red Han Chinese dress that she was wearing accentuated her temperament very well. Many people around her had their eyes on her. On the second floor of Tianlong Shopping Mall, there is a shop that specializes in custom-made clothes called Xiaoxi's shop. The young lady's voice was soft and very pleasing to the ear. "Thank you." Rinpoche smiled at the few of them, turned around, returned to his car, and drove away. The few of them looked at each other in dismay. They thought that Rinpoche was here to strike up a conversation. They didn't expect that he would just ask where the clothes were made and leave immediately. This made them a little surprised, but they still relaxed. The young lady who was surrounded in the middle smiled warmly. She felt that these people were indeed thinking too much. Just now, even she thought that Rinpoche was here to strike up a conversation. Even though she felt disgusted, she was also a little happy. At this moment, when she relaxed, she felt a little disappointed. Rinpoche drove directly to the shopping mall that the young lady mentioned, and found the shop inside. There were a lot of clothes in the shop, but they weren't commonly seen in the market. Instead, they were cosplay and some ancient costumes. This made this shop very conspicuous. Everyone who passed by would take a few glances at it, but very few people went in. Rinpoche went in, and told her what he wanted. It was a red Han Chinese dress with a phoenix embroidered with gold thread. Rinpoche even thought of embroidering the word emperor on the back of the dress, but after thinking that it was too chinibu, he gave up. After agreeing on the figure and the fabric of the dress, Rinpoche paid the deposit, and could only collect it in half a month. Rinpoche wasn't in a hurry. He could collect it after returning to Dayo. Over the next 2 days, he first bought a Type 81 rifle and bullets. Now that he was considered an acquaintance, he asked them to send the rifle and bullets to a certain place, which saved him a lot of time. Next, he drove to an empty place to practice with the drone. Even though the shop assistant had demonstrated it to him, it was impossible not to practice more. He found a square and lifted the drone up. Immediately, many people came over to watch. They watched as he lifted the drone up, flew out, and crashed. The people around him sighed. "Young man, how much did you buy it?" Someone saw that he was having fun and casually asked. Rinpoche stretched out 4 fingers. 4,000? It's not cheap. It would be a pity if it broke like this. The old man shook his head. Rinpoche smiled, returned to the car, and took out the other one. This time around he managed to avoid the same mistake as the previous time and returned safely. This greatly boosted his confidence. He played with it for a long time before putting it away. The next morning he went to the laboratory and bought another drone. Then he carried the music player, headphones, a gun, and a big and small bag back to that world. Chapter 212. The Empress didn't know how long she had been sitting there. When she saw Rinpoche, her eyes widened. She looked at him and paused for a moment. After all, his current appearance was very strange. He had a bag hanging in front of his chest, a bag on his back, a gun hanging on his body, headphones stuffed in his ears, and 2 bags in his hands. He looked like a refugee. Rinpoche placed the bags on the ground, climbed onto a rock, and sat beside the Empress. He took out a headphone and stuffed it into her ear. Then he said warmly, "Have you waited for long?" The Empress ignored him and listened to the music coming from the headphone. There were too many things in that world that she had not come into contact with. She wouldn't be too surprised by anything she saw now. In any case, Runbachian would explain it to her. A warm female voice was transmitted into her ears. Although she couldn't understand the meaning, the melody was very warm. This was a very healing song. If the name was translated, it would be called a gentle poem. Runbachian used to like listening to it and wanted to share it with the Empress. Sharing something that he liked with the Empress was a kind of joy to him. The two of them sat on the rock and listened to the gentle song. The impending battle seemed to have gone far away from them. The mountain breeze was much warmer. "It's a very strange language," the Empress said. "It's from a small island nation in the east of our world. Some things are still valuable." Runbachian naturally wouldn't say what the most valuable thing was. He would be beaten to death. "What is it singing?" the Empress asked again. Although the melody was a little strange, it was common in that world. On the contrary, it was rarely heard in Dayo and Great Xia. However, the Empress still felt that it was very nice to listen to. She felt warm after listening to it. Fortunately, Runbachian could roughly remember the translated meaning of the lyrics. He then explained it to the Empress. The Empress nodded and said, "Sing it for me." "Wait for me to learn it. I don't know their language." Runbachian laughed. Then he said with a slight flaunt, "But I know how to play pomp and circumstance with the eru." He learned the eru from his grandfather. His technique wasn't considered proficient, but he practiced pomp and circumstance pretty well. When his younger brother heard it, his evaluation was, "The eru has become a spirit." The Empress didn't think much of the words pomp and circumstance. She nodded her head and said, "Okay." Runbachian was overjoyed when he thought of playing pomp and circumstance for the Empress. "Let's go." The Empress took off her earphones and disappeared from the rock without exerting any force. She immediately appeared a few steps away. "I brought back some good stuff this time." It could even tolerate Runbachian's presence. Now it was being ordered around like an animal. No matter what, it was still a Kirin. Even though Runbachian always felt that its character was like a husky, it still had some self-respect. In the end, the Empress had to appease it before both of them set off. In the middle of the night, they saw a bonfire in the distance. When both of them walked closer, someone came out to greet them. "Your Majesty." Many people were alarmed by their arrival. When they greeted them, they couldn't help but cast sidelong glances at Runbachian. The Empress had been waiting for this fellow. She had waited until this moment to come. It was really too much, and everyone felt that it was inconceivable. However, when they thought about how the Empress had come to Great Xia, they could only sigh. When they set off again, another day had passed. Finally, everyone arrived at the border of Mount Yiyang. After crossing over the mountain ridge in front, they would arrive at a plain. It would take half a day to cross over and enter Mount Lianin. Everyone guessed that there would be Great Xia soldiers intercepting them on this plain. However, there wouldn't be too many of them, and there wouldn't be any experts. After all, they didn't have enough time to make arrangements. However, to be on the safe side, the Empress called the three captains over and asked Runbachian to take out 9 binoculars from his bag to distribute to them. "What's this?" For the past few days, everyone had ignored Runbachian. At this moment they finally asked, 10x binoculars. If you can see a small dot 500 meters away, but can't see clearly what it is, this binoculars can zoom in on that object to a range of 50 meters. Simply put, it allows you to see further and see things that are 10 times further away. Runbachian explained to the 3 captains. Looking at their bewildered expressions, he had no choice but to place the binoculars in front of his eyes to demonstrate to everyone. Then he passed the binoculars to them for them to try. With a puzzled look on his face, Tungji took the binoculars and placed them in front of his eyes to take a look. He couldn't see anything. It was as if it was blocked by something. Runbachian looked at Tungji, who was using the binoculars to look at himself. He helplessly pointed to a distant place and said, "Look over there." Tungji turned the binoculars in a certain direction and immediately got a shock. The thing that was tens of meters away seemed to be right in front of his eyes. It made his hands tremble, and he almost threw the binoculars away. Runbachian passed the other 2 binoculars to the other 2 captains. When the two of them saw Tengji getting a shock, they were somewhat baffled. In the end, when they used the binoculars to look at the distant things, their reactions were exactly the same as Tengji's. It was as if the head of the person that was tens of meters away was right in front of their eyes. Looking at the three of them hugging the binoculars as if they were treasures, Renbaqian took out another pair of binoculars and demonstrated to them how to adjust the magnification. Only after this did the few of them know how to use the binoculars. Soon after, they held the binoculars and looked into the distance, having a great time. One could imagine the shock that the binoculars brought to the people of this era. Its value was simply too great. After a long time, they put down the binoculars and looked at Renbaqian again. No matter what, this was really a good thing. The surprise that Renbaqian gave them was not over yet. Next, he took out a night vision goggles. He only brought one with him. Night vision goggles. Even in the pitch-black night, you can still see living creatures and people. You can clearly see everything within a radius of 1 kilometer. Just as Renbaqian's voice faded away, the goggles were snatched away by someone. This cannot be used during the day as it is easily damaged. It will only be effective at night. Give it to the sentries. Renbaqian promptly warned. After hearing this, the three of them suppressed their thoughts. Soon after, their gazes landed on Renbaqian again. They did not know if Renbaqian would be able to take out anything else because Renbaqian was holding on to a few bags. This is a walkie-talkie. I'll give it to the 6 of you. You can communicate within a radius of 1 kilometer. Renbaqian took the walkie-talkie and said. However, the few of them were still unable to understand this thing. After Renbaqian adjusted the channel of a walkie-talkie, he passed it to Tengji. Go to a place that is 300 feet away and speak to it. Tengji nodded his head. With one hand tightly holding onto the binoculars, and the other hand holding onto the walkie-talkie, he moved and appeared 30 feet away. In less than 3 seconds, he was already 300 feet away, which was a distance of about 100 meters. Soon after, he held onto the walkie-talkie and looked at it for a long time. Then he heard a voice coming from the small box in his hand. Did you hear that? Immediately he was shocked. This voice came from the box and the owner of the voice was still sitting at the same place. Tengji's surprised voice came from the walkie-talkie. The other 2 captains looked at Tengji, who was a distance away, and then looked at the small box in Renbaqian's hand. Say something. Ren. Deputy Prefect Ren. Tengji stuttered. Even an Earthwill level captain stuttered. It could be seen how he was feeling right now. He was a little nervous and felt that this small box would suck him in and lock him up. Come back. Renbaqian's voice fell. In less than 3 seconds, Tengji appeared beside everyone. This is the function of this thing. It can be used to communicate from a distance. However, it can only be used for 12 hours. After that, it needs to be recharged. Therefore, it can only be turned on when it is needed and switched off when it is not in use. Renbaqian demonstrated to everyone. This time, everyone looked at Renbaqian as if they were looking at a deity. Originally, they didn't understand why Her Majesty found such a weakling and even took such a huge risk to come to Great Xia for him. After everyone received the Empress, they viewed Renbaqian with hostility. However, at this moment, those thoughts were already thrown out of their minds. Renbaqian casually took out these few things that they had never seen or heard of before, and they were already shocked. Chapter 213. Early the next morning, everyone climbed over the ridge. The 3 winged cavalry warriors and the 3 captains with binoculars raised their heads, puffed out their chests, and ran to the front to investigate. Renbaqian sat on Chishue's back and listened to the walkie-talkie sound. There's no ambush at the foot of the mountain. There's no ambush in the east. There's no ambush in the west. South. North. The wind is really noisy today. Yeah. Voice X5. Behind them, Renbaqian was speechless. Are you guys here to play? This bunch of people took the binoculars and walkie-talkies and jumped up and down like monkeys. If I give you guys the drones, will you still want to fly? Also, the batteries of the walkie-talkies won't last long, right? If this goes on, I'm afraid that before we see the great Xia army, we will be out of battery. Also, who said that the wind is really noisy? Are you a drama queen? The Empress couldn't be bothered with them, and let them do whatever they wanted. Rinpoche thought that it was fortunate that he had charged the solar battery beforehand. Otherwise, he would have to carry a solar panel along the way. After a while, everyone descended the mountain. Indeed, as mentioned, there wasn't any ambush. They couldn't see anyone within 40 to 50 kilometers. They couldn't see anything further. Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't really like fighting. Of course, this had something to do with his weak skills. Even if he was holding a Type 81 rifle, he didn't have much sense of security. God knew if a stray arrow would fly out of nowhere. A group of goat riders ran wildly on the plain. This plain was more than 100 kilometers wide, and it would take them half a day to cross it. Rinpoche sat on Chishue's back, and felt that the sun was a little harsh today. He conveniently put on a pair of sunglasses, and immediately felt a lot cooler. At the same time, he turned around and put a pair of gold-rimmed sunglasses on the Empress's nose. Together with Chishue, the two of them stood out among a group of goat riders. It was as if two Lamborghini owners had sneaked into a gathering of Alto owners. There are people in front. They are the mounted scouts of the Great Xia army. Just when they could see the outline of the mountain in the distance, a voice suddenly came from the walkie-talkie. At this moment, the others could only see a few small dots when they looked in that direction. If they didn't pay attention, they wouldn't be able to detect them. However, they could see clearly with binoculars that a few mounted scouts dressed in Great Xia's military uniforms were in front of them. They were standing on their horses and looking in this direction. After all, hundreds of goat knights stirred up a lot of dust when they ran past, and it could be seen from afar. By the time they were within a distance of 4 to 5 kilometers, they could already see very clearly with their binoculars. He didn't want to know that the other party had a trap and still step into it. The others were still fine, but he always felt that he was the one in the greatest danger. What if someone jumped out from the forest and stabbed him with a knife or a crossbow? He was almost turned into a sieve by someone some time ago. "Stop!" the Empress shouted softly, and everyone immediately slowed down and stopped. At this moment, everyone could practically see the reflection of light in the forest with their naked eyes. The other party didn't seem to have any intention of hiding, and was just waiting to intercept them. They used the binoculars to take a look, and sure enough, they saw rows of soldiers drawing their bows and knocking arrows in between the trees. There seemed to be many other figures in the forest. "Your Majesty, we can directly crush these people and crush them." Tungji cupped his fists and said. The Empress turned her head and looked at Rinpoche to see what he had to say. Rinpoche felt that it was time for him to show off his skills. He always felt that the Great Xia commander wouldn't be so stupid as to rely on the archers and soldiers in the forest to obstruct them. After all, those who could lead troops into battle wouldn't be fools. Even if he was a fool, the people beside him wouldn't be fools, right? Rinpoche jumped down from the Kirin's back, took off a bag and placed it on the ground. He took out the deformed drone from the bag, and didn't forget to turn his head and tell everyone, "Help me block them." Rinpoche was afraid that if someone noticed him, they would shoot down an arrow. He didn't forget the time when the Empress shot down Ning Saichen's flying sword with an arrow. More than 400 winged cavalry warriors lined up in 2 rows and stared straight at the forest opposite them. In the forest, the commander of Great Xia stroked his beard and looked at the goat riders in formation. He was puzzled and said, "Why aren't these aboriginals coming in yet?" According to the style of the aboriginals, even if there was a mountain of daggers or a sea of flames in front of them, they would still charge in, let alone these archers. "The few of you, go and take a look outside the forest." That commander waved his hand, and a few scouts who had just returned spurred their horses out of the forest. They purposely made a round outside the forest, resembling a prostitute leaning against a brothel who was throwing flirtatious glances and saying, "Sir, come and play." Many of the winged cavalry warriors saw this scene and immediately became restless. However, with the Empress's orders, they didn't move at all. Behind the crowd, the 3 captains and the Empress watched as Rinpoche fiddled with a strange thing that looked like a spider. Renbachian installed the display screen and remote control. Following his control, the drone on the ground began to rise into the sky. The three captains' eyeballs almost popped out. This thing actually flew? The three of them raised their heads and looked at the sky. Chapter 214. At this moment, Renbachian was controlling the remote control. At this moment, the drone could no longer be seen. Following his control, a bird's-eye view of the forest appeared on the screen. At this moment, a palm-sized box with two antennas was placed on the ground under his feet. It was the ground terminal, and it could transmit and receive data up to 1.7 kilometers. Within this range, he could transmit photos back. If he only controlled the drone, he could reach a distance of 5 kilometers. It was a pity that there was no internet, and they could only rely on the ground to transmit data. They could only transmit photos within 1.7 kilometers. If there was an internet connection, he would be able to send the video directly. Renbachian piloted the drone and advanced toward the forest. He kept taking pictures and transmitting the pictures back. On the screen, he could clearly see the silhouettes of some people in the shade of the trees below. Renbachian smelled a burst of fragrance. The Empress had already moved closer to his side and was looking at the photos on the screen together with him. The three captains were anxious, but they didn't dare to get close to the Empress because they didn't know what they could see. As the distance of the drone exceeded the data transmission range of the ground station, the screen stopped at the last photo. Renbachian zoomed in on the lower left corner of the location map and focused on flying the drone to take photos. He would check it again when the drone returned. Many of the winged cavalry warriors turned their heads to look when they heard the noise of the drone taking off just now. They saw that strange-looking thing fly into the sky and then disappear. Out of curiosity, they turned their heads to look at Renbachian, who was concentrating on piloting the drone. Previously, the walkie-talkies and binoculars were already an eye-opener for them. In just one day, more than 400 people already knew about it. Their opinions of Renbachian immediately changed significantly. At this moment, everyone was curious about what Deputy Prefect Ren was up to. At this moment in the forest, the great Xia general had a suspicious look on his face. Those aboriginals had stopped a few kilometers away and hadn't moved at all. What exactly were they doing? Even when the scouts went out for a spin, they didn't react. Something was wrong. Unable to restrain himself, he landed on a tree branch and looked into the distance. Unfortunately, he could only see some small black dots and nothing else. As soon as he descended from the tree, a messenger ran over from behind. Adjunct Liu, the commandant is asking what happened. Those aboriginals stopped moving a few kilometers away. I am also very puzzled. However, since we are guarding the mountain pass, they must pass through here. Otherwise, they will have to make a big detour. Inform the commandant that as long as they arrive, they will act according to the plan. Renbachian continued to flip through the photos. From time to time, he would delete some photos that were blocked by the trees. At the same time, he enlarged some other photos for a closer look. Look here, there's a horse tripping rope. And here these people dug a hole here, but they didn't cover it well, so it's exposed. And here there's a beast trap. Renbachian enlarged the photos while talking to the Empress. Not far away, when the three captains heard their conversation, they felt as if their hearts were being scratched by a cat. The words, "I want to take a look," were written all over their heads. As he saw more and more photos, Renbachian always had a doubt in his heart. It was impossible for the other party to only arrange a few hundred people to intercept them, right? If they only set up those traps, they would at most hinder their advance. Then what was their purpose? There are people here, Renbachian suddenly said. He saw many soldiers halfway up the mountain in the depths of the forest. In front of them, there were many large stones and freshly chopped tree trunks. In addition, there were also many wooden barrels. Some of the soldiers were holding long spears, and some were carrying bows. All the soldiers had a piece of cloth tied to their arm. It was colorful and varied. After going through more than 10 photos in a row, There were at least 1,000 people waiting halfway up the mountain. It seemed like they were ready. As he continued to look, he saw a lot of firewood in the gaps between the rocks and the bushes at the bottom of the mountain. Are they going to set a fire? Renbachian looked at the scattered firewood and felt a little puzzled. As the drone began its return journey, Renbachian's eyes widened when he saw another angle of view. Behind the trees in the forest, there were many small wooden barrels. There were also scattered firewood in the surroundings. In particular, on both sides of the path that everyone was taking, there were not only firewood and wooden barrels, but also a small number of archers lying in ambush on the trees. All of these were captured clearly. Renbachian immediately knew what the other party was going to do, and guess what was in those wooden barrels? If there wasn't any firewood, he might not have thought of it. However, with the addition of firewood, it was too obvious. Furthermore, he knew what was going on with the cloth tied to the arms of those great Xia soldiers. The other party was obviously going to use a few hundred people to pretend to intercept them, and then pretend to escape toward the mountain pass. If the winged cavalry were to catch up, they would intercept them at the mountain pass. Those rocks and archers were prepared for this purpose. If Renbachian didn't guess wrongly, the wooden barrels were filled with oil or flammable substances like animal fat. If they set fire to the surroundings and the back of the barrels, in addition to the fact that it was late autumn in Great Xia, the air was dry, and a large number of fallen leaves were spread in the forest. The wooden barrels that were prepared on the mountain were the same. On one hand, they could set fire to obstruct the winged cavalry. On the other hand, the oil was very slippery and could more or less impede the winged cavalry's speed. The same was true for those traps. If the winged cavalry really barged in like this, it could be imagined that even if they were all earthwill experts, they would still lose some men due to the fire, thick smoke, and their interception. Even if the winged cavalry could rush in and kill the other party, those mounts would probably be turned into roasted lambs, and the rest of the journey wouldn't be easy. For the sake of Renbachian and the other party directly set fire to the forest and burned the mountain. It was really vicious. After luring us in, they want to set fire to the forest and intercept us halfway up the mountain, Renbachian said to the Empress. The Empress nodded her head slightly. She had seen those photos just now and could naturally guess what was going on. After looking at them, she turned around and returned to the back of Qi Shui. Renbachian waved at the three captains and showed them the photos one by one. They had heard what Renbachian said before, but they couldn't see the photos and didn't know what the other party's arrangements were. When they saw the photos on the screen, they were shocked by the scene that seemed like they had seen it with their own eyes. They subconsciously turned their heads to look at that strange thing. The three of them could guess that this scene was brought back by that strange thing, but they couldn't figure out how exactly it did it. At the same time, the tablet in Renbachian's hand that allowed them to see these photos made them feel like a divine artifact. It was even more divine than the binoculars. As the photos were shown to them one by one, the three of them frowned at first. Following which, they flew into a rage and said, "Bastards, they actually want to burn us to death. We must cut them into 8 pieces." Chapter 215. The Great Xia army didn't expect that their deployment had been completely exposed. Furthermore, they didn't expect that there were drones in this world. They were still waiting there bitterly. The drone was too small at an altitude of a few hundred meters, and it didn't have any aura, so it was very difficult to detect. Even if there was a buzzing sound, they would think it was made by mosquitoes because the sound was too soft because it was too far away. Renbachian and a few captains were gathered in a circle. If it weren't for the drone that recorded everything, they would have stepped into a trap even if they knew it was a trap without looking back. The way of thinking of the Aboriginals was to not care about what was in front of them, or what was under their feet. They would just trample over it. It was not without reason that the Aboriginals' population did not increase much in the 70 years since the founding of the nation. Although their confidence in their strength allowed them to be fearless, there were many times when they would become a sharp blade in the hands of their opponents. Just like this time, if they had directly stepped in, then even if they killed all the opponents, their mounts would have died, and there would have been a certain number of casualties. Afterwards, when he had to walk to the falling moon gorge, his physical strength and other aspects would definitely decrease. If he had to face the obstruction of the falling moon gorge, he would be in great danger. Fortunately, they had discovered it in advance. Earth's technology and drones had contributed. Your Majesty, let me take 50 people in and kill all the archers in the front. The others will circle around from the sides. As long as we kill all the people who are preparing to ignite the fire, their preparations will not be a threat. As long as the forest at the foot of the mountain doesn't catch fire, even if they set it on fire, we'll still be able to retreat in time, Zheng Hu requested. And then? The forest is full of fallen leaves. As long as they catch fire, they won't be extinguished in a short period of time, Ren Baqian interrupted. Then what should we do? Zheng Hu turned his head and glared at him. His eyes were like copper bells. There's no use glaring at me. You should think of a better solution, Ren Baqian said as he casually waved his hand. When he first arrived in Dayo, he saw that the aboriginals were all tall, strong, and valiant. After a long time, he had gotten used to it. It was unlikely that they would bite him. If we take a detour, it will take more than half a day. However, the mounts won't be able to last that long. They also need to rest, so I'm afraid we'll have to walk for another day. One more day of delay means one more day of preparation for the falling moon gorge, Li Tanhua said. When Ren Baqian used the drone to take pictures just now, he noticed that the mountains on both sides were very steep, and only the mountain pass in the middle could be accessed. This was probably the reason why they were stuck there. Can't we take other routes? Ren Baqian pondered for a while and asked. He didn't understand the geography of Great Xia at all. If they could avoid the ambush here and the falling moon gorge by changing the route, it would be worth it even if they had to delay for a few more days. Why should they fight recklessly? Even if we pass through here, the falling moon gorge will not be easy to cross. The other way is to walk through the Broken Dragon platform. That place is even more difficult to pass. Tengji shook his head and said, no matter what is blocking Her Majesty's way, the winged cavalry will advance courageously and break through everything. His voice became firm again. Ren Baqian looked at him from the corner of his eyes. There was only one way left, and that was to make sure that they didn't even have the chance to set the fire. Your Majesty, why don't we use the sarin and shoot it with arrows? Ren Baqian said to the Empress. As long as the archers in the forest were cleared out, he would let someone tie the sarin to the bow and shoot it to the mountainside. Presumably, they wouldn't set the fire until the winged cavalry killed their way over. After half an hour, they would be able to swagger through the forest. The only drawback was that it was a little painful. The remaining sarin was only 10 kilograms and 20 bottles. According to the pictures taken just now, they would need at least 6 bottles to envelop most of them within the range of the poisonous gas. The Empress sat on Qi Shui's back and listened to them. Finally, she nodded her head and said, let's do as Deputy Prefect Ren said. Split into 3 teams and each team will have 50 people. Clear out the Great Xia soldiers in the forest and bring me a bow. Yes, Your Majesty. Once the Empress gave the order, the 3 of them immediately obeyed. They first went to find the best bow for the Empress. It was a cow horn bow made from bamboo, cow horns, and animal tendons. There was also a bag of metal arrows. In Dayo, bone arrows were very common. It was easy to obtain materials, but metal arrows were relatively rare. This set of bow and arrows belonged to Li Tanhua. Normally, he wouldn't bear to use those arrows. The Empress knocked an arrow and aimed at the sky. Just as the imposing aura rose from her body, she suddenly dropped it. Everyone only heard the vibrating sound of the bowstring. In the next second, a bird directly fell from the sky. Someone ran over to pick it up and saw that there was a hole in the bird's body. However, the arrow was nowhere to be found. Soon after, the 3 of them led 50 people each and an additional 50 people to follow behind them. They ran all the way until they were 500 meters away from the forest. The maximum range of the man-wheel archers in the Great Xia army was 800 steps, which was equivalent to 400 meters. At this moment, everyone stopped their mounts outside the firing range, flipped over and landed on the ground. Then they pulled out their swords and screamed as they ran wildly into the forest. The 50 people behind them were in charge of guarding the mounts. When the distance between the 150 people and the forest was reduced to 350 meters, a sound was heard from the forest. Hundreds of arrows pierced through the air and shot out from the forest with a cold glint. Tung Ji took the lead and brandished his long sword to cut down all the arrows that were shot at him, following which he leaped more than 20 meters away. These winged cavalry warriors were equipped with weapons and leather armor. It only took them 7 or 8 seconds to run 100 meters. Furthermore, they still had energy to spare. The other party shot a total of 2 rounds of arrows and quickly fled toward the mountain pass. When the 150 winged cavalry warriors reached the forest, they split into 3 teams. 2 of the teams headed toward the 2 sides to clear out the archers that were lying in ambush on the trees. Only 1 team chased after those archers and stopped when they were about to leave the forest. The great Xia soldiers that were lying in ambush on the mountainside were originally ready to shoot their arrows. However, when they realized that no one was coming out, they raised their bows and remained motionless. Sir, only 100 of them came in. The rest are still outside. Lu Kanjun hurriedly ran to the mountainside and reported to a military commandant with a 3-foot-long beard, who looked more like a scholar than a general. Even though this military commandant looked like a scholar, Lu Kanjun didn't dare to look down on him. One had to know that this military commandant was already at the advanced stages of the Earth Will level, which was equivalent to the Earth Embryo realm. In Great Xia, he could be considered an expert. The military commandant frowned slightly. He didn't expect that the other party would actually give him such a difficult problem. More than 100 people had entered the forest. Should they start the fire or not? After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth and said, "Increase your vigilance. When they appear, use boulders and rolling logs to block them. 4,000 people have the geographical advantage. How could they not be a match for more than 100 people? As long as they are slightly hindered, the follow-up troops will come in and set the forest on fire." However, he didn't see any winged cavalry soldiers. Instead, he saw a long arrow that was shot not far away and a bottle that was tied to the arrow. As the glass bottle shattered and fell to the ground, some colorless and transparent liquid sputtered in the surroundings. The volatilized gas began to pervade this space and diffuse into the surroundings along with the mountain breeze. Renbaqian and the Empress used a pair of binoculars to look at the people on the mountainside in the distance. Behind them were many winged cavalry warriors. After a while, Renbaqian saw through the binoculars that the soldiers on the mountainside were clutching their throats and falling to the ground. The others began to flee in panic, but they also fell to the ground after taking a few steps. The facial expression of the highest-ranking general changed drastically. However, it was too late for him to realize that something was wrong. In a flash, he appeared more than 10 meters away and leaped up again. It seemed like he wanted to escape from the poisonous gases range from a high place, but he fell to the ground after jumping halfway. After a while, everyone gave themselves and their mounts the antidote and swaggered through the mountain pass. On both sides of the mountainside were prepared rolling logs, boulders, and corpses that were scattered all over. Previously, someone had opened a wooden barrel that was hidden in the forest, and it was indeed filled with animal fat. These arrangements could be said to be ruthless, but it was a pity that they didn't have the time to use it. Thousands of Great Xia soldiers died just like that in a short period of time. At this moment, everyone looked at Renbaqian with a strange gaze. Previously, they thought that Renbaqian had a lot of good stuff. Now they realized that Renbaqian had a lot of things that could kill people. To silently poison thousands of people to death, that Great Xia general was an advanced Earth Will expert. There were also a few Earth Will experts around him, but none of them managed to escape. All of them were poisoned to death. Witnessing such a scene with their own eyes, they felt a little more reverence for Renbaqian. They thought that if they were to become enemies with him one day, they would shoot him to death regardless of the consequences. Out of the 4,000 elite soldiers at the mountain pass, only about 100 managed to escape from the poisonous sarin gas. This news was sent back to Yu City and then to the rest of Great Xia. Great Xia began to investigate who was the one who poisoned them. After being enemies with Dayo for so many years, they had never encountered such an incident. The Aboriginals had always relied on their strong individual strength to crush their way through. They didn't easily poison thousands of people to death before swaggering over. Previously, Qi Zixiao poisoned the entire 9 pavilions, but the internal department of Great Xia didn't believe it. This was because the person who understood you the most was your enemy. Qi Zixiao didn't know how to use poison at all. Poisoning the entire 9 pavilions wasn't something that a person who didn't know how to use poison could achieve with just a little poison. It wasn't just 1 or 2 people, 10 or 100 people, but thousands of people who were in combat mode. The weakest among them was at the man-will level, and there were even spirit-will experts like the 8 pavilion masters. This time, she even poisoned 4,000 elite Great Xia soldiers who were lying in ambush at the mountain pass. Both times, the death toll was huge. Similarly, they were silently poisoned to death in an open space when they were completely awake. There must be someone else beside her, a poison expert. This was everyone's conjecture. Very soon Ren Baqian, who everyone thought was a lucky gigolo, appeared in front of everyone. If there was anyone who was the most suspicious, it would be Ren Baqian, who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The Empress also brought him to the 9 pavilions alone. The Empress appeared in the 9 pavilions, but his whereabouts were unknown. Just like that, Ren Baqian became famous in a way that even he didn't know and became a scapegoat. Poison warrior. Chapter 216. Ren Baqian sat on Qi Shui's back in a daze. He felt that he was like Xuanzang who went on a pilgrimage. He had just defeated the one-horned king, and now, he was ready to go to the blazing mountain. It was a pity that Hong Haier wasn't waiting there, and there was also no Shao Tian under the moonlight. After thinking about it carefully, even if there was, he wasn't Sun Wukong. Fortunately, the Empress wasn't Xuanzang either. The group of people walked in the mountains for a day. In front of them was a very tall mountain peak. After climbing over it, they would reach the falling moon gorge. After that, they would be able to return to Dayo. The 3 captains were finally tired of playing with the binoculars. They no longer had to tie the binoculars to their heads like before. However, their gazes shifted to the bags hanging on both sides of Qi Shui. At least one of the bags contained that thing called a drone. It was a pity that they weren't allowed to touch it, and this made the 3 of them very resentful. Sigh. Ren Baqian, who was in a daze, cried out in alarm. Qi Shui suddenly leaped, and almost threw him off. Just as his voice left his mouth, he felt a force pressing him down on Qi Shui's back. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Ren Baqian turned his head and smiled at the Empress. The sunlight that shone on the treetops seemed to fall down after being smashed. Specks of sunlight shone on the Empress's body. The Empress was wearing earphones and listening to music from a music player. This was considered a form of entertainment during the journey. The sunlight that shone on her body, the earphones, the music, and her relaxed expression made the Empress look like a girl under the shade of a tree in a schoolyard. It would be even better if there weren't that group of people looking at them from time to time. At this moment, there were actually 2 empty mounts. Ren Baqian didn't think of changing mounts, and the Empress didn't chase him off either. This was considered as tacit agreement that the 2 of them were riding on the same mount. Both of them also addressed each other as Her Majesty and Ren Baqian. They didn't talk much on normal days, but there seemed to be a certain atmosphere between the 2 of them that isolated the rest of the people. This made many winged cavalry warriors feel like they had eaten a mouthful of dog food every time they looked at them. More than one of them was thinking of going to the mountains to find a woman they liked and getting married after they returned. After another day, they climbed over the mountain in front of them. After descending the mountain, there was a large river. The water surface was hundreds of meters wide, and the current was rapid. The sound of the river could be heard from afar. "There's someone on the other side," Tung Ji shouted from the side. Ren Baqian raised his binoculars. Sure enough, there was a great Xia soldier on a horse looking over at them. It seemed like he was specially waiting here. Turning the binoculars to the side, he could see that not far upstream and downstream, there was a soldier following them. "It's specially waiting for us," Li Tanhua said casually. He reached out to touch the bow, but found nothing. Only then did he remember that the bow was still in the Empress's hands. The Empress didn't care that they were watching. In any case, she couldn't hide it from them, so she just let them be. Rinpoche went forward to take a closer look at the river. It was very muddy. After all, the current was so rapid that it would definitely bring up the mud in the river. It was impossible to see the bottom of the river. Deputy Prefect Run, be careful. There are strange fishes in the water, Tungji reminded him. Now, Rinpoche was a fragrant steamed bun again. What kind of strange fish are they? Rinpoche turned his head and asked. He wondered if there were piranhas. However, it was not impossible. If they could be found on Earth, it was not surprising that they could be found here as well. At this moment, the sound of something breaking through the water came from behind him. Be careful. Tungji's facial expression suddenly changed, and he pounced towards Rinpoche. However, a red shadow was faster than him and appeared beside Rinpoche in a flash. When Rinpoche heard the sound of something breaking through the water, he turned his head and just happened to see a huge fish head swallowing him. Yes, it was swallowing. The fish's mouth was like a bird's. It was very long and filled with fangs. Its body was round. This fish looked as if a bird's mouth was installed on the fish's body. It was ugly and ferocious. Rinpoche's heart immediately trembled, and he took a step back. In the next second, a spotlessly white hand stretched out from Rinpoche's side, and directly slapped the fish's mouth that was trying to bite him. That fish head looked as if it was smashed by a heavy object, and was directly knocked out of the water. The 5 to 6 meters long fish body spun in the air. Just when the fish tail was about to swing near the Empress, it was slapped on its body. Its body immediately exploded in the direction of the big river, spitting out a lot of flesh and blood. Together with the fish body, it fell into the middle of the big river. Very quickly, another 5 to 6 dorsal fins appeared in the middle of the big river. The river water was also dyed red with blood. Rinpoche only calmed down after a long time. He was really frightened just now. It was too sudden. He didn't expect that when he was standing by the river, that thing would dare to stretch its head out to swallow him. It was simply terrifying. If it wasn't for the Empress, he would have to be fed to the fish today. At this moment, the Empress had already returned to Qi Shui's back and was in a daze. It was as if nothing had happened. Deputy Prefect Renhihi. Tungji winked at Rinpoche and grinned. In the next second, he felt something flying past the tip of his nose along with the sound of the wind. It scared him so much that he broke out in cold sweat. The Empress lowered her head and looked at her palm. Her throat was crooked again. After this incident, Rinpoche became well-behaved and didn't dare to run around anymore. This world was too dangerous. Everyone immediately set up camp here. After informing the Empress, Rinpoche found a secluded place and returned to Earth. After staying on Earth for 2.5 days, he brought back a lot of things. Among them, there were 1,000 sets of antidotes. He was prepared to release the poisonous gas at any time. With the poisonous gas, he didn't feel that there was a need to bring anything else. In any case, no matter what the other party did, after throwing 14 bottles of sarin gas, they should be able to continue their journey. It was just a pity that this thing wouldn't be easy to get his hands on in the future. Other than that, he also brought back that custom-made Han Chinese costume. He held it in his hand and smiled at the Empress. Only you can display that kind of charm in this costume. I have specially found someone to custom make it as a gift for your majesty. What costume? The Empress glanced at him and was slightly puzzled. The costume was wrapped up and she couldn't tell what it looked like. Rinpoche took out a photo. It was the effect of the costume when worn on a model. The costume was a 3-looped long robe with a beard. The extended lapel formed a triangle that wrapped around the front of the body and dragged all the way to the feet. The whole costume was red in color with black and gold at the edges. The front part of the costume was a golden phoenix spreading its wings, and the back was decorated with golden flower petals. It looked extremely eye-catching, but it was also extremely beautiful. Rinpoche imagined the effect of the Empress wearing it. Coupled with her cold temperament, she would definitely be able to amaze the world. If someone else were to wear it, they would probably look like a nouveau riche. At the end of the day, the costume still depended on the person wearing it. The same costume on Yuanla would definitely have a different effect on other people. The Empress looked at the costume in the photo and revealed a look of fondness. No matter what kind of woman she was, she didn't have much resistance to beautiful clothes. She then asked Renbaqian to keep the costume in his bag and try it on when he returned. Renbaqian carried the things back to the crowd. Everyone was aware of his disappearance last night. After all, he was always with the Empress when they pitched camp at night. This morning, they didn't set off because they were waiting for him. Everyone didn't know where he went and felt that this person was even more mysterious. The river was called the White Dragon River. Legend has it that there used to be a white dragon stirring up trouble in the river. The Falling Moon Gorge was situated on both sides of the White Dragon River. It was about 300 meters high, and below it was the surging White Dragon River. At this moment, on one side of the Falling Moon Gorge, tens of thousands of soldiers were scattered and resting. A dignified-looking old man stood on a rock and looked at the other side of the river. Yesterday afternoon, they arrived at the White Dragon River and pitched camp. This morning, they didn't set off at all. This made him a little puzzled as to what the other party was planning. Zhumu elders, I will have to trouble you this time. If it succeeds, I will ask for credit for you. After a while, the old man got down from the rock and said to the two skinny old men who were sitting cross-legged not far away. Upon closer inspection, the two of them looked exactly the same. The only difference was that one of them had a bamboo embroidered on his sleeve while the other had a tree embroidered on his sleeve. After hearing what he said, the Zhumu elders opened their eyes and nodded slightly. These two were very famous in Great Xia. Even though they weren't ranked in the top 10 experts, they were ranked 11th. Ever since they were born, they had always advanced and retreated together, and had never been separated. When they fought with others, regardless of whether it was one person or many people, they would always attack together. Therefore, on the list, both of them were ranked 11th. In fact, the two of them were telepathic and had a set of joint attacks. When they worked together, their combat power increased greatly. Even Hong Wu had to scratch his head when he encountered the two of them. It was just that their individual strength was slightly weaker than the top 10 experts, and that was why they were ranked 11th. However, after Hua Sanlia's death, the two of them were now ranked 10th in the world. This time, they paid a huge price and used something that the two of them urgently needed to invite the two of them over. At this moment, a messenger pigeon flew over. After receiving the messenger pigeon, a person hurriedly went forward and reported, "General, they have set off. They will arrive in 4 hours. Chapter 217. Rinbaqian sat on Chishue's back as they walked upstream along the White Dragon River. As the terrain got higher and higher, the distance between the two banks became narrower and narrower. In front of us is the Falling Moon Gorge, Tengji reminded. At this moment, the road that had been straight all along the river suddenly took a turn, increasing the distance between them by quite a bit. After walking for some distance, Renbaqian saw many flags fluttering in the distance. There were quite a few of them, and the words of this world were written on them. At the same time, he also saw what the so-called Falling Moon Gorge looked like. He saw that the Falling Moon Gorge extended forward on both sides, and below it was a mountain wall that extended backward, all the way to the bottom. Above them, the two protruding mountains almost merged together. The closest point was only 3 meters away, but it was also extremely narrow, only a meter wide. At the same time, there was a rope bridge connecting the two sides. Here, the winged cavalry's mounts could directly jump over, but only one at a time. It was the same for the rope bridge. After reaching the opposite side, they passed through a narrow path that was a few meters long and gradually expanded to both sides, forming a large piece of flat land. At this moment, the army of over 10,000 stood there densely, stretching all the way to the forest in the distance. Flags were fluttering in the air. The 10,000-strong army stood there in neat formation, and a murderous aura assaulted their senses. If they wanted to go over now, they could only jump over one by one and face the enemy's army head-on. Needless to say, as long as the other party fired a volley of arrows at one person, Even an earth-will expert would have to suffer. The main problem was that it was too narrow. Only one person could jump through at a time, and then they would be focused on. When Renbachian saw this scene, he felt that it was spectacular. Soon after, he smacked his lips. The other party was simply breaking the rules. Without the poisonous gas, he really couldn't think of how to pass through. Even Tengji, Zhenghu, Li Tanhua and the others had solemn expressions on their faces as they carefully observed the opposite side with their binoculars. The Empress squinted her almond-shaped eyes and curled her lips. Even though Great Xia wouldn't suffer a huge loss if this group of people were to perish here, they would at least feel some heartache, right? After all, with such a neat formation and murderous aura, one could tell that they were elite soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. Qi Zixiao. An old man in armor shouted as he galloped out from the opposite formation. I am Jia Yugong, I have been waiting here for a long time. Zhenghu immediately scolded. Old thief, how can you call His Majesty's name directly? That's the Emperor of Dayo, not the Emperor of Great Xia. Furthermore, whether or not I can return to Dayo and continue to be the Empress still depends on whether or not my subordinates agree. Jia Yugong laughed heartily. 100 battles. 100 battles. The opposing army immediately drew out their long sabers, raised their arms, and shouted in unison. Their murderous intent soared, and their voices resounded through the clouds. If other people were to see this scene, their legs would probably go weak. The Empress snorted in disdain. As for the other winged cavalry warriors, they were all at the earth-will level, so they weren't easily intimidated. If they were forced to charge into the army formation with weapons and spears, they would also not care about it and charge forward while laughing. It was still unknown who would win and who would lose. However, it was true that they were guarding the other side, so it would not be easy to go over. Renbachian looked at the other side and wondered if he would go to hell if he died. In the past, he didn't even dare to kill a chicken. Then he ordered Xiongpai to kill for the first time. Then he personally killed for the first time. Then he poisoned the 9 pavilions with sarin gas. He didn't know the details, but the second time, he poisoned thousands of people to death. This time it was another 10,000 people. However, why did Great Xia's news travel so slowly? Previously, 4,000 people died at the pass of Mount Lianin, and these people didn't receive any news at all? To think that Renbachian even thought that the other party would run away after hearing the news. In the end, there were so many of them standing together. After thinking for a long time, he finally sighed faintly and said, "Sigh, what a sin." This caused a few of the winged cavalry warriors to roll their eyes. The Empress, who was behind him, almost laughed out loud at his sigh. Just as Renbachian was sighing, a Yinyao suddenly flew over from the back of the opposing army. In fact, this Yinyao had arrived a few minutes ago, but the murderous aura from below caused it to circle a few times and not dare to come down. After everyone quietened down, the Yinyao circled around again before flying toward the Yinyao in the cage below. Someone plucked the note from his leg. After taking a glance at it, his expression changed drastically. He hurriedly ran to Jia Yugong's side and shouted, "Sir, sir." Jia Yugong stood there with his back ramrod straight, looking straight at the people opposite him with a rather heroic spirit. When he heard the voice behind him, he turned around and asked, "What's the matter?" "Sir, take a look," that person said with a deathly pale face. Jia Yugong looked at him suspiciously, took the note, and immediately, his expression changed drastically. "Be careful of the poison. 4,000 soldiers from the Yuqing barracks at Mount Lianin have been poisoned to death." At first, he found it strange that these people didn't seem to have experienced any battles before arriving here. He never expected that the 4,000 soldiers lying in ambush at Mount Lianin would be poisoned to death. This time, he couldn't remain calm and heroic anymore. If it was a real battle, he wouldn't have any complaints even if he died in battle. However, if they were poisoned to death like the Yuqing barracks, he couldn't accept it. Soon after, his mind was spinning rapidly. How did the other party do it? How could he guard against it? Did the other party still have that kind of poison? How should he handle the situation now? Should he fight or retreat? If he fought, what would he do if the other party poisoned them? Right now, he had no idea how the other party had managed to poison so many people to death in 2 open spaces. Would his 10,000 soldiers follow in their footsteps? They didn't even get close to the other party before they were completely wiped out. If he retreated, how would he explain it to the higher-ups? Moreover, if the other party didn't have any more poison, wouldn't he become a joke? Right now, he had the advantage of time and place. If he retreated just like this, he could kill himself if word got out. His spine felt like it was about to be broken. After thinking about it, he could only bet that the other party didn't have that kind of poison anymore. However, no matter how he thought about it, the possibility of that was very small. At this moment, an arrow pierced through the air and flew directly in their direction. In an instant, it shot into the army formation. Not shooting myself, but the army formation? Jia Yugong was puzzled at first. Then, an idea flashed in his mind and he shouted, "The first 5 rows spread out to the sides and get into formation at the back of the army." As soon as Jia Yugong shouted, the front line of the army formation became slightly chaotic. At this moment, another arrow was shot into the army. Jia Yugong was even more certain that the other party's arrow was poisoned. At the same time, he noticed that the arrow seemed to have something on it. At this moment, he was almost certain. 6 rows, 7 rows spread out. Those who break the formation will be killed. Jia Yugong shouted again, and all the soldiers in the front line who were called out flowed around the army formation and got into formation at the back. After the Empress shot 2 arrows, she stopped just as she was about to shoot the 3rd arrow. Given the situation, even if she shot the remaining 12 bottles of poison, it wouldn't be very effective. This Jia Yugong was a little troublesome. Chapter 218. Upon hearing Jia Yugong's shout, many of the winged cavalry warriors were furious. The Empress didn't say a word and shot an arrow. There wasn't a bottle of sarin gas tied to the arrow. In an instant, the arrow arrived in front of Jia Yugong's face. Jia Yugong suddenly placed his long saber horizontally in front of him. A loud clang resounded throughout the battlefield. Jia Yugong couldn't stand still and retreated 7 or 8 steps before he managed to stabilize himself. Looking at the center of his saber, there was a dent in the arrow and the arrow was smashed into pieces. He was overwhelmed with shock that an arrow was so powerful. However, it also made him feel that Qi Zixiao had no other way to deal with this situation. Immediately he looked pleased. "Everyone get ready," Jia Yugong ordered. The soldiers at the front immediately drew their arrows, lightly knocked them on their bowstrings, and lowered them slightly. As for the Zhumu elders, they were hiding nearby and waiting for Qi Zixiao to come over before making their move. "Your Majesty, they have retreated 30 meters. I would like to lead some men to kill our way over." Zhang Hu immediately cupped his fists in front of the Empress and requested, "I am willing to go with you." Teng Ji and Li Tanhua requested at the same time. At this moment, the other party had retreated 30 meters. Naturally, the shooting range had also retreated a little, allowing more than 100 men to go over. "There's no hurry." Rin Baqian jumped down from Qi Shui's back and said, "Your Majesty, you can be a thief for 1,000 days, but you can't guard against a thief for 1,000 days. Don't look at me. This is slang. Do you understand slang?" Ren Baqian said to the 3 people who were glaring at him. "Even if they are on guard during the day, can they still be on guard at night? At that time, they won't be able to see anything clearly and won't know what will happen. It's just a delay of half a day," Ren Baqian said to the 3 of them. In fact, it was much more convenient for the winged cavalry to act at night, due to their low numbers and high strength. On the contrary, those elite Great Xia soldiers would probably be tired after standing here for an entire day. Furthermore, if they were to shoot the poison at that time, they probably wouldn't be able to detect it. "That's fine, we'll wait until night," the Empress said indifferently. If it wasn't for the fact that her strength had been greatly reduced, she would be able to kill her way over by herself. However, if we don't make any movements, I reckon they will figure it out in no time. At that time, they might come up with some ideas. I'm afraid it will be troublesome. "I have another idea that we can try," Ren Baqian suggested again. "Speak." The Empress looked at him expectantly. She wanted to see what ideas he had. Renbaqian took the backpack off the drone again and said, I will try to see if I can use this to throw the sarin over. The Empress tilted her head slightly and said, Okay. The three of them were no longer clamoring about going over to chop people up. They wanted to see what he was going to do. The thing in his hands was more attractive to them than chopping people up. In fact, Renbaqian had previously thought about the problem of the airdrop. He even went online to search for a remote control for making a timer. However, the remote control that was sold online had a very short range. Usually, it was only 100 meters. What he needed was a few kilometers. There were many other ways to modify it, but unfortunately, he didn't know how to do it. His hands-on ability had never been his forte, and he didn't know much about machinery. Later, he thought of a way to tie the sarin bottle to the drone with 2 ropes. One of the ropes was tied to the back half of the bottle and fixed to the drone. The other rope was threaded through the rubber stopper of the bottle. Then he would use the crane platform of the drone to pull off the rubber stopper. Then there would only be one rope fixed to the back of the bottle. The mouth of the bottle would naturally drop down and spill the sarin liquid. Not to mention that it wasn't easy to detect, it evaporated quickly, and it covered a larger area. The only drawback was that a lot of the sarin gas would evaporate when it was spilled, which was somewhat wasteful. However, with the lethality of the sarin gas, it should be sufficient. One had to know that after using the 2 bottles just now, there were still 12 bottles on hand, which was equivalent to 6 kilograms. In theory, 1 kilogram of sarin could kill millions of people. Renbaqian greeted the few of them and distributed the antidote to them. This was because he was afraid that they would be poisoned to death if he didn't do it properly. Following which, he took a bottle and the drone to a faraway place to fiddle with them. After a full half an hour, Renbaqian ran back to take the remote control. Is it done? The Empress turned her head and looked at him. Her clear and bright eyes contained an inquisitive look. It should be fine. Let's try it. Renbaqian grinned. At the front, Zheng Hu and Teng Ji were holding binoculars and pretending to look at the situation. The other winged cavalry warriors also got down from their mounts and split out 100 people to follow behind them. They looked like they were ready to rush over at any time to attract the attention of the other party. Sure enough, the other party didn't relax. Just now, when Renbaqian was fiddling with the drone, 2.5 rows of soldiers fell, giving Jiao Yugong a fright. Later on, he was sure that it was the spread of the poison, and that the other party didn't use any undetectable methods. This caused the other party to retreat another 20 meters. Furthermore, the other party caught a few small beasts and threw them to the front of the battle formation. If those small beasts died, the other party would retreat again. Qi Zixiao, you are unworthy of being the 5th most powerful expert in the world. You are neither advancing nor retreating. What exactly is the meaning of this? Jiao Yugong yelled from time to time to provoke the other party. If it was in the past, this group of winged cavalry warriors would have directly charged over. However, they didn't know what Renbaqian was doing at the back. Jiao Yugong's yells at most caused a little commotion before everything calmed down. Jiao Yugong stretched out his hand to block the sunlight and looked at the other side. He muttered incessantly to himself as he didn't know what these people were doing. The Zhumu elders were hiding in their hiding place. After a while, they opened their eyes. After seeing that there wasn't any movement, they closed their eyes again and continued to rest. Even though more than 400 winged cavalry warriors weren't a match for the 2 of them, it would be a little tricky with the addition of Qi Zixiao. As for how much strength Qi Zixiao had left, the 2 of them weren't confident at all. It was better to wait for the other party to arrive before making a move. Just the fact that they had captured Qi Zixiao made their withered hearts a little excited. Qi Zixiao's status and strength were extremely tempting to anyone. Time passed slowly. A small dot first flew 800 meters into the sky, following which, it began to move toward the top of the battle formation, before descending another 200 meters. The Zhumu elders suddenly looked up at the sky at the same time. With their eyesight, they could only see a small dot in the sky. It was the thing that was making a buzzing sound. The 2 of them were somewhat puzzled as they didn't know what was above them. It sounded like an insect. At this moment, a few drops of water dripped in front of the 2 of them, causing them to frown slightly. Under the control of Renbaqian, The drone in the sky pulled off the rubber stopper of the bottle as the cloud platform rotated. The mouth of the bottle immediately dropped down, and the sarin liquid spilled out. However, it was blown away by the mountain wind and scattered in all directions. Renbaqian controlled the remote control. He didn't know if the drone was successful or not. After waiting for another 2 minutes, he controlled the drone to fly back. Before the drone could land on the ground, the battle formation on the other side suddenly became chaotic. In the battle formation, the heads of the winged cavalry warriors fell to the ground. Seeing this situation, the Empress immediately knew that Renbaqian had succeeded. Her aura suddenly changed, and her cold voice rang in everyone's ears. Take the medicine and kill. The winged cavalry warriors had been waiting for a long time, and didn't know how long they had to wait. Just when they were feeling anxious, they heard this voice and were immediately overjoyed. After taking the medicine, one by one, they ran to the edge of the battle formation, jumped up, and directly leaped toward the opposite side while shouting, "Kill!" At the same time, the Empress transformed into a red shadow and leaped over everyone's heads. She shot 2 arrows in the air toward the positions in the battle formation that weren't affected by the poisonous gas. At the same time, she pounced toward Jia Yugong. She didn't react just now, but that didn't mean that she would let him off. At this moment, Jia Yugong didn't have any heroic aura. When the battle formation started to become chaotic, he was already shocked. After hearing this shout, he immediately broke into a run and ran in the direction of the Zhumu elders. At this moment, the Zhumu elders were also shocked when they saw the battle formation become chaotic, but they forcibly suppressed the uneasiness in their hearts. Seeing the Empress transform into a red shadow and pounce toward Jia Yugong, the two of them waited for a moment until Jia Yugong ran close to them. When the Empress was only about 30 meters away from him, they let out a long laugh and appeared. The two of them were equally skinny and had the same appearance. Their laughter sounded like 2 pieces of wood rubbing against each other, and it was extremely unpleasant to hear. A brush as thick as an arm appeared in Elder Zhu's hand. He drew in the air, and a black word appeared in the air. "Lock!" Elder Zhu shouted softly, and his eyes shone brightly. Following Renbaqian's shout, a huge chain appeared beneath the Empress's feet and wrapped around her. This was his godly martial arts. Elder Mu leaped directly above the Empress, crossed his arms and shouted, "Suppress!" A huge paperweight that was about 20 meters tall and more than 20 meters in diameter appeared in front of him. It was like a mountain and smashed toward the Empress below. "Your Majesty!" The winged cavalry warriors behind her were all red with anger. Zixiao, Renbaqian, who was watching this scene with binoculars from afar, suddenly cried out involuntarily. This was the first time he had seen a battle between spirit wheel experts. From such a distance, the thing that appeared out of thin air looked like a small mountain. If it were to hit the Empress, he didn't dare to think about the consequences. The Empress raised her head and looked at the paperweight that was smashing down with great force. Her eyes began to turn red, and every tiny part of her body felt like it was being torn apart. At this moment, all she could see was the paperweight that was getting bigger and bigger, as well as the evil spirit pattern below it. Jia Yugong turned his head and saw this scene. He immediately stopped in his tracks and sneered. "Qi Xiao. Huh?" Jia Yugong calmed down, and was about to shout something when he saw Elder Mu holding his throat and suddenly falling to the ground. The paperweight in the air also turned into countless pieces and dissipated. Elder Zhu's body swayed and fell to the ground as well. The black chain and bamboo brush disappeared at the same time. Before Qi Zixiao could finish shouting, this sudden change almost made him choke to death. In front of everyone he shouted, "Ha!" Chapter 219. Through the binoculars, Renbaqian saw the Empress using the ghostly steps to appear in front of Jia Yugong, following which she executed the dragon and tiger dance. Her movements were so skillful and smooth that it made him gasp in amazement. Jia Yugong couldn't block it at all. He was thrown into the sky like a broken sack, and his body was no longer recognizable as human. "Your Majesty!" Tung Ji and the others chased after him. Just now, They had almost been scared to death. Kill, the Empress said coldly. The great Xia army at the front was in chaos. The sarin gas released by the drones had killed at least 2,000 people. The Empress shot another 2 arrows, and this time, she directly shot at the area with the most people. Under the circumstances that the surrounding people couldn't dodge in time, another batch of people fell, causing the situation of the great Xia army to become even more chaotic. Some people wanted to escape, some wanted to intercept, some wanted to stop the enemy, and some wanted to rescue Jia Yugong. Everything happened too abruptly. Both Jia Yugong and the rest of the great Xia soldiers didn't expect things to turn out this way. Starting from those who were closest to the fallen soldiers, it spread to the periphery. With Jia Yugong's death, the chaos became even more difficult to resolve. After all, they were experienced soldiers. If they were given more time, they would probably be able to reorganize their formation. However, 400 winged cavalry warriors with the strength of earth will rushed into the crowd like tigers entering a flock of sheep, setting off a rain of blood. This time, the great Xia army completely collapsed. Rinpochian looked at the scene through his binoculars from afar. It could be said that human heads and severed limbs were flying everywhere, which made him sigh. However, after experiencing so much, he had started to get used to it. This was the disregard for human life that he had developed after witnessing so many massacres. The Empress walked to Elder Mu's side. She recognized these 2 people as soon as they appeared. After all, their appearances and weapons were very special. As expected of a top-notch spirit wheel expert, Elder Mu was poisoned and fell from such a high place. Yet he was still alive. His entire body was covered in injuries, and his face had turned purple. One of his hands was tightly clutching his throat, and his pupils were almost the size of a rice grain. He had almost lost his mind, but he still had some instincts. The sarin gas had shrunk his windpipe, making it difficult for him to breathe. The strength of the 2 made them realize it later, and they also breathed in more poisonous gas. Their strong physiques also made them suffer more. If the 2 of them were given the antidote now, they might be able to survive. If it was someone else, he might have made the same choice and subdued 2 powerful fighters. However, the Empress merely stepped on his head coldly. It was like a watermelon being smashed. He then landed on Elder Zhu's body and stomped on his chest and back, causing his internal organs to spurt out of his mouth. The Empress appeared beside Qi Shui in a few flashes. Rinpochian handed her a handkerchief and said, "It got on your face." Perhaps it was Jia Yugong's blood. 2 drops of blood splashed onto the fair skin of the Empress, making her look even more flirtatious. The Empress took it and wiped her face. However, not only her face, but her body and feet were also stained with blood, especially her skirt, which carried the smell of blood. Clothes. The Empress's expression became much gentler after returning. Rinpochian took out the custom-made Han costume, and the Empress jumped down from the cliff. Below the cliff, which was about 300 meters high, was the surging river. Of course, the Empress wouldn't commit suicide. With her skills, she would probably be fine even if she jumped down. Rinpochian's gaze wandered as he wondered if he would be slapped to death if he were to climb up the cliff and look down with his binoculars. He sighed faintly as he looked at the 2 winged cavalry warriors who had stayed here to protect him. They were looking at him with piercing eyes. "You guys are really a hindrance." Speaking of which, he really wanted to take a peek at the Empress's identity. Even if he could take a peek openly in a few years' time, he still wanted this kind of stimulation. Under such stimulation, he didn't even care about the massacre in front of him. His mind was filled with mosaic images. A moment later, the Empress leaped up from the cliff. She was a gorgeous lady wearing a crimson robe with a golden phoenix spreading its wings, and appeared in front of Rinpochian. Just as Rinpochian had expected, after the Empress changed into this gorgeous robe, no one could take their eyes off her. Her hair was a little wet, and it looked like she had just washed it. What made Rinpochian even more concerned was that the Empress was barefooted. After tapping on a rock, she flew onto Qi Shui's back. At that moment, Rinpochian seemed to have seen a jade-like foot. He subconsciously turned his head to look at the Empress's foot, but it was blocked by her skirt. "What are you looking at?" The Empress raised her eyebrows and asked in an unfriendly tone. "Nothing." Rinpoche hurriedly shook his head. However, his expression was very regretful and regretful. Anyone who saw him would want to give him a kick. The next moment, that foot landed on his face and kicked him off Qi Shui's back. Rinpoche cried out in pain and fell to the ground. His limbs were spread out, and he was not in a hurry to get up. His gaze wandered around a few times, but he didn't see anything that he wanted to see. At this moment, he began to feel that Qi Shui was really too much of a hindrance. He had completely forgotten how much he liked Qi Shui in the past. It was a classic example of calling people Xiao Tian Tian in front of flowers, and under the moonlight. In fact, when the Empress was on Earth, it wasn't that he didn't see her feet. In this world, there were many hot women who wore animal skin skirts. Naturally, there wasn't such a custom as to be afraid of being seen. Aboriginal women actually didn't have any defenses against this. However, the battle cries were still coming from afar. The battlefield was right in front of him. Looking at the Empress's gorgeous attire, he felt especially itchy in his heart. After a while, Rinpoche heard that the battle cries seemed to have become much softer. He got up from the ground, took a pair of binoculars and looked at the opposite side of the cliff. He saw corpses lying on the ground and blood splattered everywhere. The Great Xia army had already been completely routed and fled into the forest in the distance. The winged cavalry were in hot pursuit from behind. After waiting for a while, those winged cavalry warriors finally returned with a satisfied look on their faces. Their simple smiles were restored. After doing a head count, it was discovered that 4 winged cavalry warriors had died in battle. All of them were Great Xia's Earthwill experts who were seriously injured and died when they fought with their lives on the line. Seeing that there were casualties, Rinpoche felt that it was a pity. After all, these people dying on the battlefield couldn't escape from him. Rinpoche thought about the Bichi again. Nowadays, he was really a jinx. However, Great Xia was even more unlucky. As the saying goes, misfortune and blessing are interdependent. Where was the blessing? This time around, there were many Earthwill experts in the Great Xia army. It was just that a large number of people died from the poison gas at the beginning, and became chaotic. Subsequently, they were defeated by the charging winged cavalry, which prevented them from displaying their strength. Otherwise, with the cooperation of 10,000 elite soldiers, the winged cavalry would have suffered heavy casualties in a head-on battle. As for the Zhumu elders, they had just been promoted to the top 10 experts. Just by showing their faces, they gave everyone a fright, and they were poisoned just like that. In this battle, 3,000 Great Xia soldiers were poisoned to death. In the ensuing chaos, 4,000 were killed by the winged cavalry, and less than 3,000 were able to escape. Including the previous 2 battles, Great Xia suffered 13,000 casualties. It could be said that they had suffered heavy casualties, while the winged cavalry only lost 6 men. This didn't include the 9 pavilions and the Zhumu elders. No one knew that there was still the Qingyang sect that was quietly declining. As for Qi Zixiao, not even a single hair on her body was hurt. When this news spread, the entire Great Xia was in an uproar. The Emperor of Great Xia flipped the table in his study. When Lian Qiji from the Lian family found out about this, his face turned pale. Previously, he only wanted Qi Zixiao to see that gigolo die, but he was powerless to do anything. This was the greatest revenge he could do. He really didn't expect Qi Zixiao to be willing to go deep into Great Xia for that gigolo. When the news of the 9 pavilions being destroyed came out, he locked himself in his study for a day and didn't come out. Soon after, he sent out all the insiders except for 1 Earthwill expert. Then he sent people to silence them halfway. He realized that he had underestimated Qi Zixiao. He had underestimated her strength and temperament. He couldn't imagine what she would do if she knew that he was involved in this matter. When the results of the 3 consecutive battles came out, he was pondering how to silence that Earthwill expert. Losing an Earthwill expert could be said to be a serious blow to the Lian family. Not to mention, the Lian family now only had a total of 4 Earthwill experts after losing 2 people. He was really afraid that the slightest bit of news would spread. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.